Did it come on? Yeah. Would you like to step out just so you don't have to sit here and stare at us and figure it out? Whatever you want to do.
Test.
Sure. I understand.
Test.
That makes sense. I understand.
Test.
Is it?
Okay.
Did it start? Hello, testing.
I'll turn mine off.
That's great.
Check.
Yeah, they're all working on the microphones from the ceiling. It's whether or not live streaming. Oh, I heard something come over here. You heard it, right? It's working. I heard it coming out. Yeah. I think we're good to go, right? Super. Yes, good to go. I think it was actually. Welcome again. Thank you for putting up with a little bit of tech difficulty. And so we'll extend the time, so we'll go until 10 minutes after the hour on this clock here. All right? Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, you do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Andrew Lichterman is here with us for our interview for city manager. Thank you so much. We're going to do what we did the other day with going around with questions, although we're going to each take a question. And I think as in total, we have 15. So
Okay.
just in terms of pacing yourself
Yes,
so that
that's
you know.
helpful.
Yeah. So welcome back. And you've had a chance to meet with some of our employees and our department directors so far, and
I
had a
did.
good morning.
It was a great morning. Thank you for inviting me back.
Good. We're glad to have you here. What are your impressions so far, and can you tell us more about why you want to be the city manager here now that you've seen this? Also, if you've had your tour. No,
I'm going after
you're
this.
going after
Yeah.
that. You're the only one that is
But I
going
did
after.
walk to the city center, I made it to the coffee shop.
Great coffee. So just give us your observations then at this point.
Yeah, so the morning meet and greet with staff, I was really looking forward to it, and I got through most of the room. I tried to work the room as best I could to meet as many of your staff as could. Many different divisions were represented, which was great turnout. What I noticed is that you have a lot of long-time employees here. As I'm shaking hands and meeting folks, 20 years seems to be like the median. A couple new faces, but people 20, 30 years of experience working for the city. I've met employees that live in the city and work for the city. Sergeant on your police department and your city clerk as well with 32 years experience. So those are affirmations to me that you got a dedicated professional staff. We talked about training when I met with them one-on-one, and it just reaffirmed to me that you have dedicated, trained, professional public servants in their jobs, and you got experts in the different divisions. So all those were very positive signs and positive impressions, things that I really had hoped to find today, and that I wanted to kind of peel back the layer of onion and see who these employees really are. And like I said, it was just a lot of affirmation this morning. So it was very positive.
So why City of Englewood now?
Yeah, so the dedicated staff and the engaged citizenry go to the type of community that I want to work for. It shows that people care. I want to be in a community where people care, not to mention that, democracy requires public participation. So I welcome that. I think speaking with the director of utilities, speaking with the finance director, understanding the priority-based budgeting, speaking with the attorney and finance and other professional staff members, again affirmed for me that I have the right experience to be successful in this job. Meeting with Mr. Powers, the community development, and talking about the economic development and the progress and what's happening in the city center are the experiences that I have that I'm strong in, and that I can contribute to those teams. And I felt that I can offer the continuity and contribute to the team in a successful manner and be the city manager for the next 30 years here to keep the city moving forward. So those are attractive qualities to me.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Russell is next.
And as you know, the Denver area and Inglewood are experiencing a great deal of growth and development pressure, and this can create tension in a community. What types of experiences have you had in your career that can help guide us through the changes our community is undergoing?
I do have very similar experiences with that growth and development occurring in a municipality. And what we have seen is a lot of transit-oriented development taking place around our downtown in Deerfield, where I come from. The stresses that you've talked about, what that does to single-family residential neighborhoods that border those. So what we're seeing a lot of is developers come in and buy 1, 2, 3 single-family homes and turn them into a 7-lot subdivision, or turn it into attached housing, townhomes, and that does raise, issues and concerns from the neighbors. And I've seen it with affordable housing developments as well that border residential neighborhoods. And what we have done is, in my experience, is to negotiate with those developers on scale, on size, on the appropriateness of the density. Maybe it shouldn't be 50 units, maybe it should be 25. The developer wants to come in and pack the lot and pack the parcel, and there's where we can have the negotiation. We can have negotiation around the setbacks, and we can have negotiation around the height. Those are things that I have experienced, and it goes a long way with the neighbors. At the end of the day, if the development still moves forward, which is if it's in the best interest for the public, we can show the evolution of that project and how the city has worked to negotiate with the developer to get the best product that's not just one-sided, that we didn't stifle the development entirely, which isn't good for the tax base, isn't good for the demand on housing that we need, but also that we didn't just listen to the developers and ignore the public input. So I have specific examples of working, like I said, with attached townhomes that came in and bought multiple single-family lots, affordable housing units that went from 50 to 25, and there's been a number of those types of developments in our downtown area.
Thank you. Can I ask an additional question? Along those same lines, does Deerfield enforce current code to make the transition in those areas seamless for the current residents? I don't know if I asked that in the best way possible.
I think I can address that. I think what you're getting at is probably the underlying zoning of those lands, of those parcels. So that's, there is a philosophy around the zoning. Some people view it as a static contract, and they view that zoning should never change. And then you have a philosophy that zoning is dynamic, and comprehensive plans and these zoning maps need to be updated, which could affect the adjacent parcels. So where I've been a facilitator is to discuss the pros and the cons of those types of those types of zoning changes, to really point out that there's been a number of evolutions in our zoning map. Everything really came into the village as a P1 public land at one point. So zoning does evolve, but I think what we're all talking about today is the balance of that zoning change. The city, the organization, the demographics, the community at large is constantly changing. And so too does the government have to change and adapt. But it's about the fit, it's about the pace, and it's about the balance changed, that managed changed, and not some arbitrary change. So that's where a zoning map and a comprehensive plan can really come into play and be that tool for future development. But I think that zoning evolves as the city evolves too.
Thank you very much.
I think it's along the same lines. So when you're saying there's a philosophy around zoning, and it's either static or fluid, and I think maybe part of she hit on a lot of the question, but I don't think it's either it's neither static nor fluid. I mean, there's zoning laws and there's a process. So how did the process work in order to go ahead and honor the zoning that people invest in and rely on for the properties that they're investing in, along with your fluid philosophy?
Okay, so now we're talking about the zoning rights, and for the board's deliberation, that's very important, because what we should not be considering, particularly what I've seen, is during affordable housing discussions, is we look at if it's a residential use, it doesn't matter if they're a renter or they're an owner, and there's legal reasons behind that. The property is being used the same way you're sleeping on a bed at night, and that's all that should really matter. We hear those comments again with affordable housing oftentimes with, you know, who is going to be occupying these homes, and you hear sometimes very negative comments. So the board, their job should be to consider the land use and the land use alone. Does the land use meet perhaps PUD standards? Does the land use meet special use criteria that are clearly outlined and can be tested? They should not be looking at, like I said, necessarily who the user is or other things that violate fair housing laws. So,
And I apologize because I must have misstated my question. I don't, the question has nothing to do with who's occupying the property. It has only to do with zoning and process. And you said that the zoning was kind of a philosophy around zoning changes, or static zoning is a law that, I mean, it's ordinance, it's something that people, so what kind of process did you use as you were going and negotiating with these different entities? Was there a process, or did the city take it on to go ahead and make these kind of changes? That's all I was asking.
yeah,
That's
so
what was
we take
getting
public, so there's a lot of process with any land use approval. Process, number of public meetings. So we hear the comments from the public, we hear what those concerns are. I've received hundreds of emails, and that's my role as a city staff member, as a city manager, is to make that process very clear to the public so that they know when a decision is final, but more importantly, when a decision's not final. And we can outline this process. You know, there's a plan commission hearing, there's a workshop meeting, there's a public meeting, there's a first reading of an ordinance, there's a second reading, all these different times for the public to weigh in, for us as a staff and for the city council to take that feedback, and then work with the developer, and that's where the negotiation comes in. Then to work with the developer and say, here's what we're hearing from the public. We have concerns about height. We have concerns about density. We have concerns about traffic. How are you going to turn left out of this busy street? You know, maybe it needs to be a right turn only. All those things come from expert staff, and they come from the public input. So that's the process that we would use to go back to the developer with some credibility and say, these are the reasons why we have concerns with what you're proposing, and why you need to meet our brand as a city and our needs as a city to make sure that your development is also serving the public interest. I hope that answers the process question. And I just think I have experience with the affordable housing in particular, which I know is a big issue here. And yeah, and it's, you know, there's opinions on affordable housing, and it's staff's and the council's role and mine as a facilitator to always point out that what we're considering is the land use on any of these types of matters. And it's important that if someone makes a public comment that is not in line with that the council quickly condemns those types of comments and says, that's not in our deliberations, that's not part of our consideration. You make that clear for the record so that it isn't left open and ambiguous and someone can challenge whether or not that was part of your deliberation. We go on the record and we quickly state that that's not what we're here to consider, and that's not what we're going to take into consideration as we approve these types of land use concerns.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Quest is next,
You
and
bet.
we have a lot of questions to go through. So
Okay.
I hope we can do them, but we
Okay.
may not be able to.
Mr. Lichterman, my question is two parts. Please tell us about your approach to economic development. When do you get involved in a development or redevelopment project? And how have you ensured that the city is getting the best deal it can in previous projects you've been involved in or led?
Okay, so when I get involved with economic development, certainly I follow it through, we talked about all these processes. So we make sure that the forums exist, public meetings exist. But that's largely at this point, and I would hope to be the same here. We pretty much have a good template for that. Not that we can't deviate from it, but we have like a minimum, is what I would say, in terms of process. But when I get involved in my current role as the assistant city manager, is to negotiate really the impact fees related to the development agreements and to negotiate some of those specifics. We have completed economic development that we have, not by mandate, but rather through powers of persuasion, have negotiated with developers to include 10% affordable housing in a development that otherwise would not have any, and there was no ordinance in place that would have required it. So, so I think that my involvement comes into the finer details of a development agreement. That really gets down to the technical, pieces of the approval, where conceptually the commissions have done their work, conceptually the public's weighed in, but when it gets to the nitty-gritty, that's where I get a lot more hands-on, and I think it's appropriate at that point. I don't want to influence or put my thumb on a scale for a process while it's going through Plan Commission and other zoning bodies. They need to do their work. They need to be sovereign and have the ability to weigh in on it. They are appointed members to a board. So it's after that the staff can weigh in. And then throughout the process, I'm a facilitator of the public, as I mentioned, responding to emails, laying out that type of process. So that's, I guess, to address when I get involved. And to ensure that we get the best deal, for me, it's largely about, like I said, it's related to those types of impact fees. So we want to see what kind of amenities you're providing on site when you're doing a development. If you're putting in a pool and walking paths and dog parks and tennis courts, then maybe we can give you some relief in terms of what you need to compensate the city for the parks and recreation facilities that you are providing on site. We need to know how many students and how many families, or how many kids are being generated. Can the school district accommodate that, or is there overcrowding in the schools? So we need to understand the unit mix. Those are other ways that I can ensure that we're getting the best deal out of a product. And then, of course, is there an affordability element? Does it serve the needs of the community? Is there a shortage on affordable housing, and we need you to fill that gap? So those are some of the ways that I can negotiate to get the best deal for the city.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Councilmember Wink.
Mr. Lichterman, currently you're assistant city manager, and we'd like to know why you believe that at this point you are ready to take on the role of a city manager.
Yes, thank you for that question. It's wonderful that where I've been given a opportunity that I really just couldn't imagine getting anywhere else. I've been groomed for this position, I think, is the way to really boil it down. My boss has allowed me and given me that opportunity purposefully and intentionally so that I could be prepared for this job. I am often in a room as the only assistant manager representing, the city on economic development boards or county convention and visitor bureaus or the hospital community advisory board. That room's not full of assistant managers, it's full of city managers, and I'm there. So those are the types of opportunities that I've gotten. Also, meetings. I don't know how many times I've been in a meeting where it's the mayor, myself as the assistant manager, and another party. It could be a business, it could be the chair of a commission, where there's been some conflict. And the manager's not in that room, but the manager allows me to be in that room. Those are the types of experiences that I have gotten and the opportunities I'm very grateful for, and the reason that I can say I've been groomed for this position. And most recently, it's when I talk about these economic development and development agreements, we just did one for a 286 unit apartment complex. The manager won't see it until it's on the public agenda. I've met with the developer, I've met with the mayor, I've reviewed the impact fees, I've seen the proposals, and they call me, and I've worked through that. The manager allows me that, and that's been a great opportunity. And just numerous examples of working with the business community, talking to the Walgreens Corporation, Caterpillar Corporation, they call me for their business inquiries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Sierra.
Sure. As an assistant, you've had more project-oriented approach to your day-to-day duties and responsibilities. How do you think you will go from a project management to more of a strategic and higher level focus in your day-to-day activities?
Yeah, it's something I look forward to, and I value my experience of being hands-on. That experience, I think, is what prepares me to have that strategic vision. And really what I mean is to ask the right questions. If I didn't do it for an extended period of time, if I wasn't exposed to the role that I had been exposed to, I wouldn't know the product, whatever that is, well enough to be asking the right questions. So I think a great case in point is writing budget messages for the finance department. I've written those GFA budget messages. I thought I knew them, but when I wrote them, I realized there's a whole lot more to them. So now that I've done that for 3 years, I know what questions to ask of a finance director or assistant finance director, and to challenge their thinking in an appropriate way, and then to keep the council's vision at the forefront for me. So I value my experience, but it's not what I plan to do as a city manager. I plan to delegate as a city manager, and I have the credibility to ask the right questions.
Thank you.
Councilmember Barentine. 6.
Can you give us a specific example of regional partnerships you've initiated and how you went about developing a regional?
Is your microphone on?
Oh, I am so sorry.
Thank you.
Can you give us a specific example of regional partnerships you've initiated and how you went about developing a regional approach to an issue?
Yes, regional partnerships were part of a voluminous number of regional partnerships, but your specific question is one that I've initiated. So I'll give you an example of one that I have started, and that one is related to electricity procurement for 70,000 households. It's 8 communities in the Chicagoland area. We've had an electricity consortium before, and essentially what we do is go out and work with an alternative supplier to buy a cheaper energy price per kilowatt hour for our residents than they would pay from a utility. We did that for 3 years. That part, I led pieces of it, but I initiate that specific part. But what I'm getting at is the piece that I am currently initiating. I emailed those same 8 communities. That program got idled. It was a good success for 3 years. We saved millions of dollars. $432 was the average saving to our resident over the 3-year period. So it was a real program. It went idled because the savings just weren't there. Just recently, as about a month ago, I sent an email to those 8 communities because I got wind of a new program that we could use that consortium for, and that's to bring 100% renewable energy to those same 70,000 households. So I worked with our energy consultant. I convened the meeting. I was the first one to ask for the 8 of us to get into a room and talk about it. And the idea was that the proposition changed, the value add proposition changed. Instead of bringing a program to 70,000 households that would save them money, we would bring a program to 70,000 households where everybody was using green energy power through RECs, renewable energy credits, buying from solar and other wind farms, and offsetting your energy usage of brown power, what otherwise would be brown power. So it gets very complex, but the idea, I think the example there is that I took that initiative. I emailed those 8 communities. They met at the Deerfield City Hall for a reason, because I was the leader of that group. I will be drafting those memorandums to our board to advise them on where we're at. I've got the energy consultant in the room that is now doing the data analysis for us, and our next meeting will be, well, we're trying to schedule it right now. He's completed that data analysis, so in a week or 2 we'll be meeting again at Deerfield Village Hall, and we'll be better understanding of what that realization could look like for each of our specific communities. So I can talk all day about partnerships, regional partnerships, but I think if you want to know one that specifically I have initiated, then that's the example that I have initiated.
Thank you. So our staff has gone through quite a bit of change in the last 4 years. How would you approach making a change in process or the city organization if you are next city manager?
Yeah, change management is a difficult thing, but it's a necessary thing in an organization. As we talked about, change is necessary to the organization. If you're not changing, you are dying because everything around you is changing. So you have to change. So change management, I think there's a couple ways to approach it. I have experience doing that. Implementing new technologies is often one that you get early leaders, early pioneers on. So I think it's important to try to find a couple key stakeholders that buy into your vision and understand why you're making a change. I think it's important that helps to lead the process. Get co-captains, in other words. This isn't a one-person show. I'm working with a team here, and I have co-captains that can help me lead their individual teams. So let's get a couple pioneers to help us be those co-captains first off. Secondly, let's talk about why we're doing this change and how it serves the public interest. Because then, when you get people that push back, we can remind them that we are doing this to serve the public interest. This is in line with the mission and the values of the organization. This benefits the city. And we're not asking for anything unreasonable here. So then I think thirdly is you get the momentum. You get inertia and you get osmosis. As you get those early adopters and you get departments accepting that change and seeing the value in that change, those stragglers start to come on board because they realize that the change is happening, and they hopefully realize that the change isn't quite as bad as they may have thought it was at the beginning. So those are some of my methods to leading change through an organization.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Russell is one that leads into that.
Thank you. Can you tell us about a time when you initiated a significant change in your organization? What was it, and how do you identify the need for change and then implement it?
Yeah. So I think a good example of initiating change was the way that we pay our invoices. We used a new workflow system, and it was a huge benefit to the organization and a huge benefit to the public. Essentially, what the change was switching to a new ERP system, enterprise system for finance, for our financial invoice entry, and it required us to attach invoices to every single purchase that we make. So the backup is always there electronically in our system. It pays dividends on the back end because anytime you want to see a bill, we used to have to go into a file room, dig through banker boxes, find the year, find the vendor, right, as you can imagine. And most often you don't have time to do that, so you just put it on hold. You put it on hold. Well, now you can log into your system. You can find an invoice from 5 years ago, open up the attachment, print it out, and there it is. If I got to respond to a public request for information, I can do that, or my team can do that, very quickly. If I need to respond to questions from the mayor and the council, I can do that quickly. So I think the point is very clear that it pays dividends on the back end. Where the difficulty was working with our staff to change that process. So there's things that we can be a little adaptable. I went by department to train them. And I will tell you, I started with, as I had described, not with the most difficult department. I knew from knowing my staff well who would be the most difficult people to get on board, and they went last. And they went last intentionally and purposefully. It let me, as the trainer, get a little smoother, I'd say, in my presentation to them, right? So I could be a little more polished by the time I came to them. I could work out the kinks with people that would be willing to work out those kinks with me. So by the time we got to them, we realized, there were some adaptations that we could make to help it be a little smoother. So you have to scan the invoices. Well, there's a central scanner in the middle of the copy room, but not everybody really wants to get up and scan all the time. So we got some desktop scanners. They're very inexpensive, but they help that person a great deal by being able to scan right on their desk. So those are the little adaptations that you can make for somebody to get them on board with a change, and that's the way that I approach that specific one.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet. I have 3 parts to this question, and so I'm going to give all 3 now. If you need me to repeat any one, just ask. Can you please tell us about a time when your elected body was divided on an issue? What was your role, and how did you and your manager approach it? What would you do differently if you were the manager?
Okay. An issue that the board was divided on.
Correct.
Yeah. We talked about commercial filming last time. I think right now we're seeing it with affordable housing. We have a divide on our board whether affordable housing should be, as the comprehensive plan has written it, which is that affordable housing should be on a case-by-case basis. And that's that's the story I told you, where we use powers of persuasion to include it in a development. Or whether the okay, sorry about that. Okay. Or whether the affordable housing should be what we call inclusionary zoning and a mandatory requirement in developments of a certain size. So that divide is currently happening, and the board's mixed. Whether it should be, we're scared that it might stifle development because the requirement would be too stringent. At the same time, without it, we feel like we're not going to serve that portion of the public and we need to be serviced. So my role, I have a really, I think, involved role in affordable housing, and I had seen it on some of your agendas as well. I have drafted that initial report that went to the board. Now, I worked with a team. I worked with the planners. I worked with the builders. I've worked with there's affordable housing partnerships in the community, and I did the best research that I could to present a thorough, comprehensive report to the board about the pros, the cons, and then different mechanisms. You can offer housing density, you can offer density bonuses, you can offer cash in lieu of affordable units. So really getting into the nuances of affordable housing. And I think the most difficult part of that presentation to the board, that stuff was easy to understand. The most difficult part was the area median income element of affordable housing. That is not Deerfield's affordable AMI, area median income. It's the 6-county region that's, comes out of the federal HUD organization. And so explaining that, and explaining that to the council and explaining that to the board. So my role was very involved, like I said, drafting those reports and then explaining a lot of those nuances. Of course, my city manager was involved with that as well. And something that I think that we do different is perhaps a better understanding of what we get credit for when it comes to affordable housing. So we had presented to our council and working with my city manager that there's 3 tiers. There's like 50% AMI and below, there's the 51 to 80% AMI, and then there's 81 to 120% AMI. That's the typical HUD schedule that they publish. But this is what I would have done different. The HUD schedule, although it goes up to 120% AMI, the state of Illinois does not give you credit for that in their report that they issue every 5 years. Every 5 years they come with a report and it says your community has X amount of affordable homes. Well, they only include the low income and moderate income tiers on that HUD schedule. So the 50% and the 80%. They do not include the 120%. In hindsight, we should have really emphasized that to a greater extent to our board, because while it does meet affordability needs, the state of Illinois is not going to give us credit for those, for that level, that 3rd tier of affordability. So we're talking about a very nuanced topic, a very complicated topic, a very divided topic. We have board members that don't think we should be doing it at all. And then to layer in there this last education piece, I think is something that we would have done a little bit different and really honed in on what we get credit for from the state and what we do not get credit from the state.
Thank you. I do have a follow-up question.
Go ahead.
When did that conversation take place? When were you guys going through that issue?
So we've had committee of the whole meetings on it. We've put it on hold. It'll resume probably next month. So that conversation took place a couple months ago. It's relatively recent. We're not talking about it at the moment because we have the developer coming through that's getting approval this evening at our council meeting, actually, is getting approval on the ordinances for that apartment complex we talked about, where they have agreed through our negotiations to include 10% affordability. And we want to resume the topic after that specific proposal is approved, because we don't really want to muddy the waters with here's an inclusionary zoning ordinance, we're mandating it, but we have one that's currently going through that wasn't mandated. So they're going to go through, they're going to get first reading of the ordinances this evening. In 2 weeks, they'll have second reading of the ordinance, that approval will be done, and then we'll resume that affordable housing conversation.
Thank you. What is the AMI you've been using there? What is it for that 6-county region that you gave us?
What is the average AMI?
Please.
Well, it varies by the size of the household. So for like a four person household, the AMI I wanted to say is like it's hard to say off the top of my head, but I wanted to say it was like 68,000 or something like that. But it's a sliding scale. If there's one person in the home, if there's 4 people in the home, so it's a publicly published HUD schedule I could follow up with you on. But
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Councilmember Barentine has a follow-up.
What measures did you put in this negotiation to make sure that that 10% is actually affordable housing within these projects? Who verifies that and who follows up on that? And then what consequences are there for that if they aren't meeting that?
yeah, so we have a restrictive covenant placed on the property. So that's key to continuing this affordability in perpetuity, or the timeline on this one is actually going to be 25 years, but typically there's some restrictive covenant that goes with the property. We use that HUD schedule, as I talked about. You back into what the rents are for that. So we put a maximum rent. We have allowed for every 3 years that we do an audit on the property, and then we use, because we don't have a housing authority, we have used those partners that I mentioned that I reached out to. CEPA is the name of one of them, Community Partners for Affordable Housing. HODC is another one. We use partners such as those that are the experts in the field to verify the rent every 3 years. We can do an audit. We can verify that developers are meeting the standards that we've set in the development. And in terms of the penalties, they have to make those units available within 30 days. So I don't know that there's a financial penalty. Litigation is always an option if they're not, but basically there's a restricted covenant on a plan. Every 3 years we get to review it. We use experts to do that, and they're compelled to make those units available.
Great. Councilmember Wink?
When preparing reports for elected officials, do you make a recommendation? Do you provide alternative policy options, for example? Kindly tell us about your approach.
Yeah, can you repeat the first part of that question?
Absolutely. When preparing reports for elected officials, so what generally is your approach? Do you include recommendations, alternative policy options, et cetera?
Yes, absolutely. My standard approach is I always would include a recommendation. So that would be, staff's recommendation, my recommendation after I've worked with a team to kind of devise what would make the most sense. I would typically include alternatives, depending on how complex the issue, which they usually are. So there's going to be a multitude of alternatives. And then the pros and cons of, that's how our council and how our mayor specifically puts it often. Pros and cons. I want to see pros and cons. So it's very simple. It takes a little brainstorming and a little creativity with our team, but we try to keep our reports, I would also say, pretty concise and easily digestible for the public and for the board. These policies go through multiple stages, but when we first initially present a policy, we're trying to make it very digestible. We don't want to, use a bunch of jargon if we don't have to. That's what the engineers do in their reports, and we try to clean it up and make it very common sense language for our board and the public to digest. So I hope that answers your question.
You, Councilmember Sierra.
Could you tell us about a difficult issue you personally had with an elected official and your role in resolving it?
Yes. We had a very difficult time with the passage of a coal tar regulation. So I know out west typically it's not applied to driveways, but in the Midwest and on the East Coast there's a coal tar product that goes down as an asphalt sealant. there was a lot of debate on the council about the harms of that. So we had recommending bodies with conflicting views as well. Our Sustainability Commission, and they did not want to regulate it, but we had a very strong outpouring of residents that did want to regulate it, because you're putting this on your driveways. It contains, not to get into too much technicals, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which can be toxic, but it's debatable. There's science on both sides of it. The residents were concerned that this is being put all over town. The runoff is going into our creeks, hurting our water system. Not to mention that you have children sitting in the driveway playing with sidewalk chalk, drawing on it and breathing it in. Pets walking on it, bringing it into your house. But we had council members that did not agree with that thought we did not need to regulate it. We had the coal industry coming to our board meeting saying this is safe. There's no need to regulate it. So the contention around it wasn't necessarily the difference of opinion. The contention around it was we had a Sustainability Commission report saying not to regulate it, and it got overturned by the city council. And the city council did not accept the recommending body's report. That's very unusual. Most of the time the reports come through and they get accepted. Not always. This one caused a whole lot of angst with the chairman of the Sustainability Commission and the council members, some of the council members. So much so that they were going to resign over it. So this is an example of where I talked about the mayor and I are in a room with the chairman of the commission talking about we cannot guarantee to never overturn a commission. We're going to vote our conscience. The council's going to vote their conscience. The mayor could not guarantee that, and that was the guarantee that they wanted, but it just wasn't going to happen. But we can respect each other. We can have a different opinion, and that one-on-one conversation was very contentious, very difficult, and it's the mayor, it's myself, it's the chairman of the Sustainability Commission having those conversations. The manager's not in that room, and that was a very emotional issue. Like I said, it almost led to a couple resignations.
Thank you. Councilmember Barentine.
We have elections in November. How do you disseminate information in an election environment?
Oh, sorry, Councilmember Wink, missed your light. Thank you. Hold on.
If we can do this a little briefly, how about an example of a personal difficulty with an elected official?
A personal difficulty with an elected official. I like to get along with them most of the time. Certainly we don't agree.
Surely.
We try not to make it personal. The examples I gave are policy differences.
Right.
I don't know that I think I've been fortunate. I don't know that people have attacked my character. I don't think a councilman has attacked my character in any way. And if they, and I think where we do disagree, I try not to take it personal, even if they want to make it personal. Right, I have a job to do. I'm here to serve the public interest. I'm here to lead the staff. And one council member or a small group of council members attacking me personally is just not a productive way to move forward. I would always try to take the high road and try not to let those personal attacks get under my skin.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Councilmember Barentine, yes.
Is your mayor elected?
Yes.
Okay. We have elections in November. How do you disseminate information in an election environment?
Interesting. I don't know that, if you're trying to distinguish how I would do it in an election environment versus not an election, I don't know that I would do it any different. Or you mean information specifically about the election?
At this point, I'm just reading the question, so I guess you have some leeway.
Yeah. Look, I got to get the information out to the public. We have a team of people to do that, and we're going to do it effectively. And those methods have evolved and will continue to evolve. Next door is now the best thing to disseminate information in a lot of ways because you know who you're talking to. Twitter has its advantage. Instagram has its advantage, right? These things evolve. The point is to be constant with it. And I think that's the emphasis that I would have on any communication during election season, outside election season, constant communication on various methods. We still mail a paper newsletter, I'm not taking that away just because we have online communication. It serves a certain demographic that people want to read it on the newsletter. On the other hand, there's going to be people that never open the newsletter because they're going to read it on Facebook. The point is we need to be on all of those platforms, doing all of those and keeping up with them as they evolve.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem has a follow-up.
This is just really simple. Is it your policy that your staff would remain neutral in any election year?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We are professional staff.
Thank you very much.
Council, because we have about 12, 14, 13 minutes maybe left, it was suggested perhaps what we do is now is, since all of us have gone around, pick the question that you want to ask, and we'll continue around. So the first question I would like to ask actually is a specific question to you. You've been in one community for your career, and it's about half of the size of Englewood, the city that you're currently in. It could be a bit of a jump for you in this. Can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts about this transition? And I'm going to include the others with this, sort of your oversight of groups that you have had or haven't had, public works and safety.
Yeah, I'll do the oversight, I think, first. So I have 5 direct reports. I oversee the deputy clerk as well. I oversee the IT division, which is critical dependency. The organizations, if you've seen the ransomware in the news, I mean, IT is just hugely critical nowadays. Organizations completely dependent on it. I oversee the community development department, which has been just a great advantage for me. That's including the building department and the planning department, and oversee human resources. So a lot of the internal service, as well as a lot of the external facing components of the city. Communications is in there as well. So those are some of the pieces that I oversee. The pieces that I didn't oversee, I made sure I got exposure to. Police department, I don't oversee. Fire district is separate, much like you guys have a contract. So I chair a Northeastern Illinois Public Safety Training Academy, which gave me a wealth of information about the fire and police district. So where I knew I was not getting exposure to, I found a way to get exposure to it. So that, I think, addresses the oversight. In terms of stepping up to a larger community, I think that certainly there's challenges and things that, that will be new, but I have a lot of comfort in 2 things. One is, I think I've talked about my technical expertise and my ability to navigate difficult situations through a keen sense of emotional intelligence. I think that gives myself, and hopefully gives all of you, some comfort in I can adapt to whatever the problem is, even if it's a problem. No one's going to have seen every problem that comes into this chair, but you need someone that you have confidence in that can adapt and address all of those problems. So that gives me some comfort. But secondly, I don't think we're all that different in terms of the issues that we're facing. I know, Deerfield comes off as not always being the most urban of environments, but I did grow up in an urban environment, I'd say that first, but also that Deerfield, when I look at the crime statistics versus the police department crime statistics here, they're really not that similar. Sure, the volume's a little greater, but your #1 police crime statistic index is theft. So is that in Deerfield. When you park at Walmart and keep your car unlocked, you might get your purse stolen out of the car. So those issues are the same. Second crime index, major crime index on your police report was assault. That's also true for Deerfield. We have domestic situations. Those are mostly what they are. What you don't have in your town are homicides on every police report. Now, when they come out quarterly, you're going to have one, and so are we. But that's not what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. We've had high-profile homicides in town. I've been there for them, but I'll tell you, they're usually a domestic situation that turns into that. So that's very similar, I think, to the urban issues that you're facing. We don't have the level of homelessness that you guys are working with, and the police chief, I know, has a big day tomorrow. I was talking with him about that. And I think he has a great, very innovative approach to it, a humanitarian approach, as he put it, and I think that was really great. But we do too. We have homeless folks, and we have sensitivity to that. And we have worked through human resources and social service networks to find them housing. We have people that need emergency assistance, so we have those types of programs. So I think that gives me comfort in stepping up to the larger city. The economic development I feel very comfortable with. We're building 6-story assisted living facilities, we're building apartments. It's the same thing that you guys are building here. So I think those are some of the reasons that I feel very comfortable taking on this role.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Russell?
There's another part to that question, is how do you get up to speed on Colorado laws and other differences between Colorado and Illinois?
Yes, that's a good question. And my approach is networking. I have shown that throughout my career. I've been the president of our state association, the Assistant Manager Association. Like I said, I'm the chair of a police and fire academy, training academy. I don't know everything. I won't know everything. I need to know who to call when I don't know everything. So that's been my approach. You have senior staff, they're gonna be very informed, but I'm not limited to the 400-something employees that we have in Inglewood. I'm gonna know my neighbors, and the important thing is I'm gonna know them before I need them. You know, I'm gonna invest that time up front. I'm gonna become part of the Colorado City Manager Association. I followed it for a long time. I've had my eye on Colorado. This isn't, you know, just a whim that I've applied here. I want to be here. So I'd love to be the president of that estate association. That would be my ambition. Not on day one, but I wanna get involved. I wanna grow my network. I think it's the value that my boss sees in me today, is that he knows he can ask me any question because I know someone that has the answer to that question, even if Deerfield hasn't done it. And then beyond that, the public sector shares information. It's great. You know, that's the difference between the private sector. Our information is open. So even if Colorado hasn't done it, you know, to address the state laws, I need to know someone in Colorado. But other problems that the city faces when Colorado hasn't done it, maybe someone in California has done it. Maybe somebody back in Illinois has done it. Maybe someone in Texas has done it. So for me, it's about growing a network. That gives me the comfort, and that's why I feel comfortable coming to a new state.
Councilmember Cuesta?
Thank you. I'm going to go with the closing questions. What do you believe you would need from this council to help you be successful in your city manager role in Inglewood?
Honesty is number one. We need to communicate. We need to have open, honest conversations. We can disagree, like I said. Let's avoid the personal attacks, but if they happen, I'm gonna let them roll off my back. I need the council. I think second most important thing is to do their homework. I have a job to do, right? And you have a job to do. Let's meet in the middle. If we send, I know it's a lot of work for the council, but when we send you, and thankless work I might add, but when we send you a packet, a 300-page board distribution, and there's a lot of material in there, I need you to read the report. So when we go to the city council meeting, we're all on the same page, and we're all starting at square one, and we can have a productive conversation. So I need honest, open communication, and I need you guys to do your homework so that when I invest the time with our staff and send it to you, I know it's getting read, and we can begin there.
Councilmember Wink?
I actually have no more questions.
All right. Councilmember Sierra?
I'll go ahead and ask question 24. If you were offered the position and accepted it, how long do you foresee yourself in the role?
That's a good question. I want to move my family here. I want to be part of this community. I talked about what's attractive to this community. The level of engagement is a big piece of it. It shows that people care. I want to be part of a community that cares, raise my family here, and be your city manager for the next 30 years.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Berentine?
I don't have any other questions.
Thank you. Do you have questions for us?
I will ask one, I think. I saw it also was a recent public request for information, but could you just share with me maybe the history of the structure, the makeup of the city manager's office? So I know there's no assistant right now. It's a vacant position. Has there always been, is there a history of having one? Is that a new position? Can you just give me a little bit of the structure of the office?
You mean an assistant city manager?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So when I first came on, and I think probably through most of the 2000s, Councilmember Berentine can speak to it too, we had a deputy city manager, very similar to an assistant. I don't know fully sometimes what the difference in the titles are, except maybe pay. But we've always had one, and we've had an interim. So Dorothy Hargrove, who you've met, it was the interim assistant city manager to Eric Keck when he was, when our deputy, or our assistant left. And so there has been that position there, and then there's been an assistant, administrative assistant to that person as well in the city clerk's office. Councilmember Barrington, you want to add in?
The first assistant city manager was, I believe, Mike Flaherty when he came in. Would have been 2000s, late 1990s when the city center
Okay.
went in. Prior to that, they did not have that position. The administrative staff has grown a lot, comparatively speaking, in the last, say, 20 years for the division, even though the amount of employees has not, I mean, and the population really hasn't changed. So, but that's when that piece came in for that.
Okay.
The communication office is also reported to the city manager.
That
Councilmember
just
Wink?
started, though. The communications director
just-
was just created, I think,
Yeah.
within this last city manager position.
Actually, Leanne Hoffines reported to Gary Sears when we came on, so. But anyway, go ahead, Councilmember Wink.
No, I meant that
There
we
was
didn't-
also,
Well, I'm sorry. I was just saying we recently created the communications director position. You're correct. That wasn't a department as it's laid out in our budget now. That's the only
That's it,
difference.
fine. Councilmember Wink?
and then there was the position of management analyst that
Okay.
That's right.
was brief and I believe reported to the city manager, and as I saw it, performed quite a role distinct to the deputy city manager or the city manager, but obviously very supportive. One I would like to personally see
Yeah.
again.
That person was hired into a new position and then left, and was hired when
Right.
Eric Heck was here, and then
Right.
he left, and so it became a very fluid, I think,
Okay.
a difficult position to hold
To
when
maintain.
Yeah.
you don't have the one who hired you to begin with. So
Yes.
I would say it's a little bit open as to what you need,
Yep.
what a person needs.
Okay, thank you for that history. I just had one other question, if you have time.
Quick one, we'll do one more.
It's just about the hospital partnership, because I know that's a major employer. I have a history of sitting on a community hospital advisory board, receiving grants after several years of negotiations with them. I know you guys value that partnership with them. There's talk in the different plans that you have about working with them for a housing assistance program. Is there traction there? Is that something we need to get off the ground? Is that underway?
Those are simply in documents, because we have not had, I mean, unless community development has had formalized conversations with them, which they might, that's not come before council.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
from my perspective, we have so much more there that we could really build, because it is the largest employer, has a
Yeah.
huge impact on traffic, has huge impact positively on employment, all
Right.
kinds of opportunities, so both hospitals. So
Right.
I think it's wide open to develop that further, and they have new leadership in both of those places in the last 3 to 4 years. So I think
That's
it's
great.
willing to be open to that too.
Yep,
So,
I have
yeah.
experience working with the hospital administrators, president of the hospital, North Shore Hospital, for us, and like I said, I sit on that board, and we've had really mutual beneficial programs that have come out of that relationship, so,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you very much. And
Thank
I
you for
hope
inviting
you
me
enjoy
back.
the rest of this day with all the things that we're doing. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time.
I'm looking forward to my tour. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for inviting me back.
To speak, right?
Because it sounds different. When I turn it off, it sounds different when they're talking, so I can tell when I talk.
just want to make sure we're okay with the next candidate and doing what we just did when we got tight at the end. Do you mind if we've gone around twice to keep doing it that way? We seem to get, that's what Heidi had suggested. We're okay with that? Councilmember, Mayor Pro Tem?
I probably shouldn't have asked that extra question.
I think it's fine. I think it's fine.
Okay.
This is the time to get as much as we can. They're individual people, and they all have their own unique things that we can ask questions about.
And you had time because I didn't ask one.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think if you have a question like that, that's fine.
And
That's fine.
I wasn't being rude. I merely noticed that he had answered
Right.
3 or so of the closing ones, so I thought there
Yeah.
was no reason to belabor it and
Right.
keep going.
Great. Okey-doke. I think we're next. We're ready for Shawn Lewis, or James is his formal name, but Shawn is what he goes by. Welcome. Good. Good to see you. Oh, it's okay. Thank you for the public. It's James or Shawn Lewis, and thank you again for being here. We have a list of questions like we did last time, and actually there are a lot again. There are like 20 some, but we may, once we've gone around twice with each one of us answering one, we may just jump to answering what we think we still want to get to. So just pace yourself. So welcome again. You've had a chance to meet with some of our employees and our department directors. What are your impressions, and can you tell us more about why you want to be the city manager of Englewood? Also, you've had the tour, right? So give us any observations you've had from that as well. Oh, sorry, you have to push the green light,
Gotcha.
and
Okay.
you might as well keep yours on the whole time.
Okay.
So don't worry about turning it on and off.
Okay, so observations, impressions from the tour, and what was the second one? I think the middle
Yeah,
question.
so you've met with employees and the department directors. What are your impressions? Can you tell us more about why you want to be the
All
city
right.
manager, and then any observations?
Yeah. Well, first
And-
of all,
and, yeah, this could take a lot of time, so I would pace yourself on
okay,
it. So,
I'll keep it brief. Again, thank you for the opportunity. I didn't tell you when I was here last time, but it was actually my birthday. So it was a great birthday
Happy
present to
birthday.
be invited back for this round of interviews. I have really been impressed with the staff in talking to them, the level of knowledge, the level of commitment. I met a man in the Parks Department that's worked here for over 40 years, so I know that there has been quite a bit of turnover, but I also really appreciate that some people really have some amazing institutional memory here, and we'll be relying on that quite a bit, I'm sure. If I'm selected for this position. In terms of observations from the tour, we're going out with Darren and Dan. It was really interesting to hear their perspective, which was echoed from when I asked you guys what you were looking for. I think Mayor Olson, you said, the kind of the push-pull between people who really want change and people who maybe don't. And so really saw that in action in terms of, some of the development that, frankly, I even found to be a little bit surprising in some of the neighborhoods where, some much larger, multifamily kind of units on a block that would otherwise be single family. And I don't think that that's a bad thing as long as that's been planned ahead for, people know what to expect from a zoning perspective. But I definitely, it really emphasized something that I feel very strongly about, and that is that new development really should match the character and the quality that you see in an existing neighborhood. And sometimes entire neighborhoods are gonna be changed, and that's a fact of life, and if that's been planned for and communicated to residents for quite a while, I think it should be, then I think that can be very positive. In terms of why I want to be the city manager here, I think I might have mentioned this, but I wasn't looking for a job when I applied for this. I love what I do and where I am in Longmont, but when this position came across my desk, I should say over email, it I really started digging into Inglewood. And as I look at the challenges facing the community, as I look at the staff and the amount of turnover that's been, and some of the, the challenges facing, community members as well as the city organization, that's what attracted me to the position, which some people would say is not my best judgment to say that, but I really thrive in challenging situations. To some extent, Longmont, as great as it's been, has really, we don't take anything to the voters that they don't pass. We have the highest possible scores on citizen satisfaction. And those things are all very satisfying to know that I've had a part of that. But I really would like to come to a community where I can really help build that same level of trust and confidence from the community to the city. And so Inglewood, I think, provides that opportunity. I also think that Inglewood is really kind of perfectly situated for where I want to be. One of the employees this morning said, "Oh, I love, Longmont and all the open space." And I love the open space too, but I'm actually ready for a more urban setting. And so that really attracts me to Inglewood. So I'm really excited about the opportunity.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
And as you've already alluded to, you know that the Denver area and Inglewood are experiencing a great deal of growth and development pressure. This can create tension in a community. What types of experiences have you had in your career that can help guide us through the changes our community is undergoing?
So I'd say that, in terms of examples, I have been the city's lead on a project to bring an affordable housing, office, and private sector redevelopment to our downtown area. The county, Boulder County, bought a big piece of land, put up a really nice facility, and then bought a church across the street from it, tore the church down and made it a surface parking lot. And we went to the county and said, this is really not the vision for downtown. And so we did a request for expressions of interest, trying to get interest from the development community, and unfortunately had 0 responses to that. So at that point, we really looked at what were our partners in terms of affordable housing. So we talked to the Longmont Housing Authority. They didn't really have the capacity at that time, ended up working with the Boulder County Housing Authority. And since the county already owned it, it was a good natural partnership. But in order to make it really revenue positive for us, we really needed a private sector partner in that to make part of this half block that the church had bought to make it really generate money for our tax increment financing district in downtown. So we found a developer who was interested in putting up a private sector office complex that would share a garage with the county and with the offices that are going to be in the bottom of the housing portion. But in terms of working with the community, that was met initially with a great deal of trepidation. We have very solid, I would say high value residents that are right in that proximity in our Old Town area. And so the folks, when they found out that we were putting an affordable housing project there, became very animated, I would say, in terms of that prospect. And so what we did was we really backed up and said, you know what, time out on the whole discussion. We don't want to have any more public discussions until we've really vetted this project with the community. So we had a number of meetings with residents. We explained that this was not going to be the low AMI, average median income housing. It would be workforce housing, to fund folks. There would be a couple of permanent supportive housing units in that. But again, just educating them on the need that existed in the community, the why we were doing it. Because again, I think a failure of city leaders sometimes is they tell you what, but they don't tell you why. And so we really kind of drove that home. And ultimately, now we have a lot of support in the community for that project.
Sorry. Sure, Councilmember Barentine, it's a follow-up.
Is that housing project in process, or is it completed?
It is. In fact, we were just awarded the low-income housing tax credits from the state, and so that means it will should be under construction by next year.
Oh, okay.
Oh, but yeah, it's not under construction right now. The site's been cleared and it's ready, but we're waiting on the final kind of financing pieces.
Councilmember Cuesta.
All right, Mr. Lewis, I have a 2-part question for you. Please tell us about your approach to economic development. When do you get involved in a development or redevelopment project, and how have you ensured the city is getting the best deal it can in previous projects you've been involved in or led?
Well, as you know, my background has been, most of my time in departments has been in economic development, so it's an area where I'm very comfortable. I would say my philosophy on that is based on the community needs. So in 2 cities, both the one that I'm in currently as well as San Angelo I was in before that, I have immediately sensed the fact that there is not a common vision or strategy behind economic development. So in both of those cities, I've worked to put together what's known as a target industries analysis. And what that really does is analyze your market. What is your market in terms of your labor force, your education, your AMI? What are your transportation assets? What are your supply chain assets? What are the existing industry clusters in a community? Looking at that and then really trying to match industries that would match the people that you have. So instead of just a shotgun approach where you're kind of going after everything, I really believe in being targeted, but that starts with the target industry analysis. And I always pair that with a strategic plan. So not only are we getting a market study and to really understand our market in order to develop the target industry analysis, but we're also developing in conjunction with that a strategic plan of things that need to happen with regard to economic development to be successful. In Longmont in particular, we also had what I would call warring economic development partners, and that strategic plan really helped to bring people together because you had the SBDC going one way, the chamber going one way, our economic development partnership, the city, you had all these players, but by getting them together and getting their input, their buy-in, and collaborating on that plan and getting everybody to agree to that, and ultimately we also asked the boards of each of those organizations and the city council to approve that. That really gave weight to making that a reality, and it's already paid off in Longmont.
Councilmember Wink.
Today.
Oh, sure, he's got a follow-up.
I may have you push a little further on the second portion of that question, which was how did you ensure that the city was getting the best deal?
Oh, great. Yeah, so that would be more on an individual basis. Sorry, I missed that part of the question. So in terms of how we're getting the best into the deal, again, I think it goes back to, is the industry that you have the opportunity to bring in? Now, I'm going to assume that you already have a prospect that's interested in the community, and so maybe they're asking for incentives. I really go back to that target industry, and I say, will our workforce and all of our other assets match up with this? If they do, that's kind of a checkbox that you have to check to make sure that they're a good fit. In terms of kind of the incentive piece, we also spend a lot of time with our finance department and even sometimes bringing in folks who really know private sector financials to really dig into the financials and see if the gap that they have between what it's going to actually cost to build that and what their return will be. Because let's face it, developers always say they have a huge gap and the city needs to come in and close the gap. So we really dig into their financials to see if that's accurate. So really understanding the numbers, understanding the data, and digging into that is very important. And then ultimately, is it a business that's going to advance your strategy for economic development? We recently, I think I mentioned last time, recruited a Smucker's plant. I actually think we were a little too aggressive because even though that was advanced manufacturing, it probably didn't meet exactly the targets for income of those employees. So again, you have to look at what are they going to bring in terms of jobs, what are they going to bring in terms of average employee salaries.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Wink.
As currently as assistant manager, why do you believe you are now ready for the city manager role?
Thanks for the question. I really feel like my whole career has been leading up to this point in some ways. Again, knowing that I did not go looking for a job, but looking at Inglewood in particular in terms of location, in terms of the challenges facing the community, the things that I've experienced in other communities, in other positions, I feel like have ideally prepared me for some of the challenges that are here. I think, as I said, things are really great in Longmont and they're very stable, but I'm looking for more of a challenge. And so, yeah, I think that it's just a matter of, it's almost like the target industry analysis. I looked at my own skill set and my own abilities, my own assets, and then saw if that could be a match with the community. Because I would not apply in a community that maybe was a soulless, downtownless suburb. I want a city that has history. I want a city that has character. And I want a city that has challenges that we can really dig into as a community together.
Thank you, Andrew. Shawn,
Yes.
I beg your pardon.
Councilmember Sierra.
Yes, as an assistant, you've had a more project-oriented approach to your day-to-day duties and responsibilities. How do you think you will from project management to more, wait. This one is written wrong on my sheet, I believe. Okay. How do you think you will move from project management to more of a strategic and higher level focus in your day-to-day activities?
I've spent some time talking to other city managers about this question because it's something that my friend who's the city manager in Louisville said was a real shift for her, and she moved from assistant to manager. And I think that really what's key is that you know how to measure performance, you know how to define a performance plan, and you really know how to very clearly articulate and document expectations for staff. So you're exactly right. I definitely have had a lot of experience in project management, but I feel like actually I'm in some ways stronger in terms of working with staff to create goals, to create objectives, and really work through an action plan. That's one thing that I talked about this morning with the leadership team, is the fact that it starts with the council's vision, but how do we turn that vision into a set of actions that's going to achieve that vision? And so I think that that's really where I succeed, and it's something that I already do with my current staff, with the directors and the division managers that are in my area of the city. We're very focused on performance measures, making sure that we are checking in on a regular basis about, are you achieving your goals and are you succeeding?
Councilmember Berentine.
Mayor, is it okay if I ask a follow-up question first?
Yep.
You brought up the Longmont downtown areas on the TIF. When was that put into place?
We actually were one of the earliest downtown development authorities in the state. So we hit our 30-year mark in 2017, I believe. And we were able to get the city and the school district to go ahead and reauthorize another period of time to extend that TIF. But the county, unfortunately, decided to opt out of that. So, but it's been over 30 years, about 32.
Okay. So this church property was already included in that area, or it was included in the new area?
Well, actually, it's been the boundaries of that tax increment financing district have been the same. We've actually expanded it one time, I believe, to include a new apartment complex. But no, the boundaries haven't changed.
Okay, thank you. Can you give us a specific example of regional partnerships you've initiated and how you went about developing a regional approach to an issue?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I might have mentioned this previously, that I think that one of my strengths that I bring to the table is my partnerships that I've already formed and relationships I have with RTD. So certainly as the regional transportation provider for the Denver region, I think it's critical that that be a partnership that we really maintain. I'm seeing that in the tour. I saw that, just the fact that they provide, I think, something like 80% of the funding for the trolley. So obviously Inglewood has done a pretty good job in that. But my personal experience in that has been working on peak rail service. And I didn't get to explain this during my last period with you all, but essentially the Northwest Rail Corridor is by far the most expensive line, about $1 billion. RTD can't afford that. So what can we do in the interim without having to build a second track along the BNSF railway that goes from downtown all the way out to Longmont and beyond? How do we do something that will really achieve the goal of moving people, particularly during rush hour? So what we proposed in Longmont, and working with council and Director Lubau on the RTD board, we crafted a plan that we brought to our regional partners, which are Louisville, Broomfield, Westminster, and Louisville, and we said, what if we just did a few trains in the morning rush hour going south to Denver, and in the evening going north to Longmont, stopping, of course, at all the stops. So first we had to get everybody to agree to only get one station, because everybody had, 2, 3, 4 stations planned for their communities. So please pick a station. And again, Longmont was really pushing the envelope here, because we didn't initially, particularly from Boulder and Boulder County, who are much more focused on bus rapid transit, we didn't necessarily necessarily have buy-in from everybody in the region. But as we really worked with partnerships in Louisville, Broomfield, and Westminster, what we found that is eventually Boulder kind of came along and really got on board with, this is really something that could be affordable, that RTD, that over the next 10-year period could afford to initiate. We as communities can put some money in. And so we actually ended up with a service plan that we worked with RTD officials, Chris Quinn, the Fast Tracks manager, and actually developed a service plan. We developed an operational plan and costed out all of those. The only thing that we're lacking right now is getting a number from BNSF for what it would cost to buy 2 windows of time in the morning and the afternoon to run our trains behind the freight trains that are going there. But I'll tell you, it took a lot of cajoling and convincing and friendship making and all the things that really go into a successful partnership.
Thank you. Our staff has gone through a lot of change in the last 4 years. How would you approach making a change in process or the city organization if you were our next city manager?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing to start with, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse because I think I mentioned it twice earlier, but organizational culture is critical. Having the right organizational culture is critical for doing any change. I wouldn't propose any significant change here until we had done some serious work in organizational culture. And I get the sense that actually there's a pretty positive culture here now, but what I think that we need to do is, again, think about how we can be an integrated culture, where we're thinking about what decisions that I'm making impact another department. How does it impact the residents? How does it impact businesses and our partner organizations? So first, we would develop an organizational improvement plan, which I've created those before. So the second thing in terms of getting that change would be, let's see, there's culture, commitment's the last one, communication. So communicate. And again, not just communicating the what, but the why. Here's a change that we're thinking about making. We want to communicate what it is we're considering doing. And then next you would move into collaboration. So you would collaborate with the staff to really get buy-in and feedback on, what do you think about this? Do you think this would work? How can we make this better? Because when people have buy-in and they participate in the actual change, instead of having it be mandated down from the city manager's office, you're going to have a much better chance of success in getting that change, really bought into and make it sustainable. And then the last one is commitment. And I think that one thing that leaders that aren't so great do is they say, okay, we've designed this change, now go and do it. And while the city manager is not going to be able to lead every change, that comes to the organization. They have to be fully committed. If the organization senses that you're kind of just, you've put it out there and you've asked directors, you've asked, division managers, whoever it is, to implement it, but the city manager appears to no longer be bought into the change or really participating, himself, in my case, himself, in the change and following kind of some of the action plan that you've put forth to make the change, that's when change is not sustainable, it is not successful, and it never achieves what you want it to do. So really being committed to that's critical.
Great. Next is Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
And can you tell us about a time when you initiated a significant change in your organization? What was it? How do you identify the need for change and then implement it? And I think you already addressed some of this.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an example that I haven't already given you. I think the most substantial would be the reorganization of the former Economic Development Department in Longmont. So we had what you all call community development here was renamed economic development. That was sometime in the 90s. And what happened was you had a minority of council who was not pleased with the actions of a nonprofit, a public-private partnership that we contracted with to perform economic development duties. So because they couldn't get that contract canceled, they didn't have the votes for that, they directed and peeled off another council member too, they directed the city manager to create an economic development function. And so you ended up with a group of people that we actually pulled planners, long-term planners from that department to work almost exclusively in economic development, along with, of course, the director and the economic development manager of that. And what that did was hurt long long-range planning. So we were actually taking away, we hadn't updated our comprehensive plan. We were years overdue for updating that. Even though the planners seemed to like what they were doing in economic development, it wasn't what their training was in, it wasn't what they're. So by pulling that back, focusing on planning, we really had some good wins and went ahead and adopted that comprehensive plan. But we also ended up transferring those services that we were providing from an economic development standing, particularly those serving small businesses. We transferred those to the public-private partnership because as we looked at the numbers about who could do this most efficiently and most effectively, we determined through a really comprehensive organizational assessment that actually that was where we would get the better value. Now, obviously, that was a lot of change, and that moved a lot of cheese, if you will, within the organization. So we had meeting after meeting with our partners, like the SBDC, like our Colorado Enterprise Fund, folks that had been working with the city staff very closely that said, oh, we don't know how this is going to work. So we really were very explicit on how this was going to work, what the expectations we were giving the Longmont Economic Development Partnership, that public-private partnership, what those were, and then staff too. Multiple meetings with staff, really explaining the why. And once it was all said and done, it was a painful process. There was a reduction in force that went along with that. But I think that long term, it has really improved both our economic development services as well as our planning services.
Thank you very much.
You, Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a three-part question. I'd be happy to repeat any portions of it if you need. Can you tell us about a time when your elected body was divided on an issue? What was your role and how did you and your manager approach it? And what would you do differently if you were the manager?
So a time that the council was divided, how we approached that?
Correct, how you and the manager approached it.
And then what would I do differently?
Yes, what could you, yes, if you would have done something differently.
Well, there are so many examples that I could give because, there really, a good council is never a unanimous vote every time. I don't think that that's necessarily even healthy. But I'll say that one of the most difficult ones that I went through was probably when I was a planning director, was the adoption of a comprehensive plan. And so that was in San Angelo. And again, we were a little overdue when I got there for that comprehensive plan update. And what happened was we saw that council members were zeroing in on a particular facet of that plan. For instance, it called for restoration of kind of a trolley down one of our main thoroughfares that went through downtown. And the council member thought that was such a terrible idea that he was willing to say, I'm not going to support the comprehensive plan. And there were a number of examples like that where a council member was really zeroing in on the policy. I'll tell you, it took us a year to get that policy adopted, and that in and of itself was a strategy because we really, once we saw that we had a divided council on that comprehensive plan, we realized we need to pull back, we need to do a lot more public education on what's in the plan, and really educating the council too, because the council was hearing from stakeholder groups as opposed to looking at the document as a whole. So we, another strategy was setting up one-on-one meetings with council to go over the plan. We created a more robust executive summary of the plan to really roll out to the public, to provide to council so that they could be equipped to answer questions from their stakeholder groups, some of which were somewhat opposed. And then thirdly, we changed the plan. Sometimes if you can't get something passed, there's something in it that is a poison pill that you have to take out. And so we ended up making a number of changes to that particular comprehensive plan because the fact is, we need a comprehensive plan. There was a lot of good work there, and if there was something like a trolley going down a street that was going to get a council member, we re-looked at that and ultimately removed that from the plan. Was that the best policy decision? I don't know, but the fact is, councils are the ones who approve comprehensive plans, and so we really try to look at that. What I would have done differently is I would have done that before we ever took it to council the first time. So and frankly, that was as the planning director, I was asking for things to be put on the agenda. So that was on me more than it was the manager at the time. And so I had not done my homework with the council to educate and inform. And so what I would do differently is start with that part of the process.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wink.
Thank you. When preparing reports for elected officials, do you provide a recommendation? Do you provide alternative policy options? Just a description of your approach would be helpful.
And this would be particularly for things coming to council,
Yes.
those kind of policies?
Yes.
Definitely. I want to say that I think it's really interesting that Inglewood puts the staff recommendation in the agenda. I don't think I've ever seen a city that does that. But I think that that is something that certainly gives the community a good sense of where the staff's at a quick glance instead of having to dig through the packet. So I think that's kind of a novel approach. But in terms of my particular approach, as far as recommendations, yes, I think that staff has a professional responsibility to provide recommendations to council, but those recommendations should never be based strictly on the opinion, even if it's a professional opinion of staff. Those have to be backed up by quantitative as well as qualitative data. There are some simple things that probably don't need to go to the public, but the public should have, particularly on a policy change, you should have already had extensive public input and a community engagement process that leads up to that really helps inform staff's recommendation on what the council, what they're recommending that council should do. So I think it definitely starts with that data, both quantitative and qualitative, in advance. There are times when I think staff shouldn't make a recommendation, particularly if it's something that council has said, we want to see this on an upcoming agenda. And the staff, may not have strong feelings either way on it, or maybe you have a divided staff. And I typically have let council know we don't have consensus on staff on this issue. And typically you don't always have 100%, but typically you can kind of get to consensus on staff. So I think it's important for your leadership team to get consensus around what the recommendation should be. But if they can't, or if it's something that's really more council-driven and staff doesn't have a really big part in that, I think it's fine for, in one city I worked for, we put in the recommendation line, staff recommends consideration. So it was kind of like, we don't have a recommendation, but it was something to put in the line. But I think that on occasion, that's appropriate.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Sierra.
Yes, could you tell us about a difficult issue you personally had with an elected official and your role in resolving it?
Yeah, I will take an interaction that I had during a council meeting with the person who's now our mayor, Brian Bagley. Brian and I, when he was elected, he was brand new when I got to the city of Longmont, and we had never really had an opportunity. He was one of the busier council members because he owns a large law firm. We had never really had a chance to develop a personal relationship to where I really understood what he wanted and needed in his kind of philosophy on government services. So when we took what staff thought was an amazing redevelopment opportunity to sell a building that had formerly been storage for our museum, but it was this beautiful historic Longmont Power and Communications. It was our first power plant, this really, really pretty building that we had, after the museum storage moved out, we rented it to a company called the Cheese Importers. It's still one of our biggest tourist draws now. But when they said, we can't continue putting money into this building, we need to buy it. And we had no really good answer of why we needed to continue owning that building. We also were facing a roof replacement. We were replacing water intrusion into the basement of the building. So there were some good reasons for us to, get rid of the building. When we took that to city council, and I almost hate to say this since we're on camera, but I'm friends with him now, and we've had a good talk about it since then. But he said, I think that staff is somehow coordinating with people who want to buy this at the expense of the public. And he said that during a council meeting, and during the break, I went up to him to just have a conversation about, are there specific things that you've heard? And he was pretty agitated about that, and I think he had some real estate friends who were advising him we were underselling the building, and I kind of got to the crux of the matter, which was he thought we were giving a sweetheart deal to this company, even though we had a lease with them, to say any improvements you put in would be discounted from the sales price. So that was the caveat. And I think once he really became aware of the fact that, you know, there was that provision in the lease, he still wasn't happy about the price, but he understood staff's perspective. He really backed off after we explained to him, you know, we don't know the people who own cheese importers. I mean, we know them casually, but, you know, there's no interpersonal relationships that's clouding our judgment or our, you know, work on this topic. And so I think once we understood that, that somewhat contentious exchange, which actually lasted 3 meetings. So we had to keep bringing that back. Council would ask for more information. We would bring it back. And so yeah, until we kind of got those issues worked out, it was pretty contentious. But he's now the mayor. We're good friends. We serve on the Mayors and Commissioners Coalition for the US 36 group and have gotten to know each other a lot better. And yeah, he's happy with the sale and what we did with the building.
Councilmember Barentine.
We have elections in November. How do you disseminate information in an election environment?
May I ask what kind of information?
It's not a unique question, but I did not write it, so I guess you get to handle it as you see fit.
Okay. Well, I'll start with what I would consider the easier kind of side of equation of elections. Not necessarily easy, but a little more straightforward, and that is on bond issues, particularly anytime that you're asking either for a tax increase or you're asking for the voters to approve bonds. We have you know, a very defined process in which we have staff that come up with the pros and cons of whatever that initiative is. And we create a one-page summary that is then taken out to the public. And, excuse me, anytime we have presentations by city staff, the city staff is required, and of course this is by law, as you know, to give both sides of the issue. We can't go out and advocate. After the council has voted to put it on a ballot, city staff becomes Switzerland. But we can, of course, educate and inform the public about what that issue is. So we create those pros and cons, and then you know, we take that on the road, and we go to local Rotary clubs, and we go to homeowners associations, and we say, you know, here's what people that support this say, and here's what people who are opposed to this say. And we want you to have the facts and to know the issue before that comes out. And so it's been a really good learning experience. It's not something that I had experienced in Texas, where you had that really bright line between what staff and council can and can't say. I also think that council, particularly if council puts something on the ballot, council really has a responsibility that if they support that particular ballot, to also do your own education. And if I'm not mistaken, I'll have to review state law, but I believe council has more flexibility, certainly more flexibility than staff, with regard to the ability to advocate for, you know, something that's on a ballot. And so certainly that's the prerogative of the council. Staff doesn't get involved in that. And so I hope that answers your question with regard to ballot issues. Great, thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to let us move to asking questions that we would like, and I'm going to move into the selective or specific questions for you.
Great.
You have oversight over many significant departments in Longmont. You've not had oversight of public works, utilities, finance, or police, I believe. Or can you tell us if that's actually accurate and how you have interacted with them or other experiences that you've had in your past with those functions?
Yeah, very much a fair question. I would say one correction is that I did oversee a city engineering division. As part of the reorganization that I helped the city manager design when we really combined a development services department, we asked for fire marshal's office and city engineering division to be moved into that development services department. So had a lot of experience with CIP projects as it's related to public infrastructure. As I think I mentioned in my last interview, we went through a stormwater ordinance policy creation and associated fee and really dug into a lot of those things. So I think on the public works side, I have a pretty good understanding. Bless you. The other thing that I think is really important to understand about overseeing a planning department is that planning touches every department. And whether that's the comprehensive plan, which provides land use guidance, infrastructure guidance, that can be used by your utility departments, that can be used by public works, that can be used by public safety functions. All of those things feed back into the comprehensive plan. So by virtue of just necessity, the planning department, again, which I've been the director of, has to have that interaction with other departments and other utilities. In terms of public safety, I've also overseen a fire marshal's office, and so, as I mentioned, we brought that into the Development Services Department, and that provided a really good tie-in for me into the fire department, because they had been in the fire department, but because we had arson investigations, that part of their job was still with the fire department. So the fire chief and I had to work very closely to do performance measures for the fire marshal's office, to evaluate them, and we always came to a consensus on how we would evaluate that staff group. And so quite a bit of experience with police and fire. This one's a stretch, but I would say my dad was a sheriff of our county for 12 years, and I've always had a really good relationship with police departments, because there's something about being a child of a law enforcement officer that there's some kind of feeling of camaraderie, but I realize that that's a stretch with that one.
Thank you, appreciate it. Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
My question is, you have a strong background in planning and development. Do you see any high-level strengths or weaknesses for Inglewood in these areas? And how can your experience help us as we move forward?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think that particularly the tour was really informative on that, and I asked some questions of Dan and Darren about why was this development or this proposal opposed, and really got a little more feedback into a question that's been in the back of my mind as I watch Public Invited to be Heard, as I listen to council meetings on the topic, but really boils down to, I think that there is a concern, which is also shared in Longmont, about density. And so I think that what I bring to the table in terms of that is the ability to talk through why a specific development is needed, but why the comprehensive plan in many cases calls for something that allows for more density in a particular area of the city, and talking to residents about the why. Now, is it going to be my job to talk to every resident before a zone change? No, and I understand that, but I will be directing staff to be much more engaged with the public about what's coming down the pike, why it is that is being proposed, and how it does or doesn't comply with the comprehensive plan. And frankly, if it doesn't comply with the comprehensive plan, I'm going to take a really good look at whether we should be doing it or not, because that's really that foundational document. So I think that I've had some experience, particularly in Longmont, with council members who they themselves are very nervous about density, and some of those concerns are very real. And so addressing those concerns, whether it be height, one thing that we did in our downtown area is we developed a code that was very much driven by what's known as the historic Eastside neighborhood, that when we decided to rezone the downtown, we had a staggered kind of development pattern, that most of our buildings on Main Street are 2 stories, and we said, you can't do 3 stories until you get back, behind those buildings. And then behind that, you can do higher, but then you have to stagger down because the neighborhoods are right behind. So we really took a very cautious approach in how we rezoned to make sure that we had height restrictions that really met neighborhood and community standards and guidelines. And it's something that I think is critical, is understanding the needs and the demands of the community, because it's not just about what the people yelling the loudest are asking for at a council meeting. It's also about really having a pulse on what the neighborhoods need and want.
Thank you.
Councilmember Barrington has a follow-up.
Since you're in Colorado, and the question is going to come up, being from Longmont, our community development director is from there. Did you have an opportunity to work with him there?
I did.
Was there any major project that you were doing at the time?
Mm-hmm.
Which
Yeah.
one was that?
I'm sorry?
I don't remember which project he had worked on.
Yeah, I think the one that would be most relevant is our Twin Peaks Mall redevelopment. And Brad, as I've said on many occasions to our staff and said it to him as soon as I found out that I was a finalist and reached out to him, is one of the best redevelopment experts in the state. His experience with ULI and his experience with the tools and the methods for promoting development, I really think are second to none. And so he was really our lead staff member on the redevelopment of the Twin Peaks Mall. I know this town knows a little something about redeveloping malls. We were a little bit behind you guys, and it was only about 4 years ago that we had a mall, 5 years ago, that we had a mall that had one tenant left and one restaurant. Then the restaurant closed. So we literally had, one of what was one of the larger malls in the region, that part of the state, at one time that had basically been vacated. And so we went through a process of working with a property owner to purchase that property. Ultimately, we went to eminent domain with Dillard's, who was the last remaining tenant. And Brad did an excellent job of really shepherding that project through, but it was very much a team approach. We had weekly meetings just on that project that were with the city manager's office, planning, engineering, utilities, et cetera.
Thank you. I mean, I know we're smart to have him as well. And not to pick on the community development department, are there any other directors or department people that you've had the pleasure of being able to work with before?
Here in Inglewood? Yeah. Thanks for the question. No, I don't believe I've had experience with other folks and directors.
Thank you. All right, I have to flip to the end here. What do you believe you would need from this council? Oh, sorry, you're next. I was giving him a follow-up. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Quest is next.
You bet. What do you believe you would need from this council to help you be successful in your city manager role in Inglewood?
I think the most important thing that a city council can do is provide a clear and concise vision for the city. You know, there was a famous king that once said, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." And I am a firm believer that we have to have a council that takes a leading role in coming up with that vision. And as I talk to the leadership team, and as I talk to city staff, and even some residents that I've been able to talk to, I wouldn't say that there is something that people have necessarily grabbed onto. I think you guys have done some good visioning work, but I don't sense that there is consensus around that vision. And so I think one of the things that we really need to do in the next year is really put some meat on the bones, if you will, for that vision. There's a strategic plan that seems pretty useful, but pretty helpful. It aligns with your priority-based budgeting, but that's different from a vision of what you as a council representing the community wants to see this town be in 10 years. And that's something that we have to answer, because this is a transition period. I wouldn't say that Inglewood is necessarily at a tipping point per se, but we are at a point when development pressures and our existing housing stock and our existing business inventory is going to change. So the city can either kind of lead or follow in that. And I really feel like that city council, what I need from council for the staff to be successful is for you guys to really put that vision, and we get that vision on paper, we vet it with the public, we make tweaks to it, and then we get a vision that then staff can take and turn into an actionable implementation plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Member Quest. Can I ask a follow-up to that? When a comprehensive plan is already in place, which usually lasts 7 to 10 years, sometimes 20 for some cities, how do you go about recasting a vision within the context of a comp plan?
Yeah, so this is a tough question, because I've seen councils that say, our vision is a traffic signal at such and such intersection. Well, that's not a vision. That is very much a tactical, and certainly council can have those requests, but that isn't necessarily that vision. So I think the approach that I take is I really, and I've gone through a number of exercises with this. Sometimes it's a letter to yourself written from when you're 10 years in the future. And you're saying, here's what I wish that you would have done when you were me 10 years ago. And that can be kind of a helpful exercise just to get the juices flowing about what we think where we think this town is headed and what we want this town to be in the future. And so I think that there are a number of exercises and tools that I have used and will use if given the opportunity to really work us through that process and to really craft that vision. But the comprehensive plan is certainly an important document to making sure that we are being consistent with our land use, we're being thoughtful about where infrastructure goes. But again, that's a little bit different from vision. There are a number of vision components always contained in a comprehensive plan, but I think that the council itself has to articulate a vision that we can all get behind, that then the community really knows, and our partners can come along with us to really push that vision forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. If offered the position, how long do you see yourself in the role?
Yeah, I mentioned early on that Inglewood, to me, is ideally situated. Sometimes we feel a little bit like the redheaded stepchild up in the north. I really appreciate and love the area, and when I love a place, I want to stay there. And so this is a place that I think I would really like to be long-term. You can probably see from my resume, I'm getting longer and longer every time I go. Maybe I don't like moving, I don't know. But I would entertain any amount of period of time that council would ask for in an employment agreement, because I think that if I am continuing to be productive and we are continuing to move the ball in the right direction that council wants to go, I would like to stay somewhere long-term, because frankly, I think that city managers, you can't really start seeing the impacts of implementing council vision for a number of years. So to me, it would be extremely fulfilling to be able to see that and then help craft, the next kind of generation. That would be ideal for me.
Wonderful, thank you.
Councilmember Sierra.
Yeah, over these 2 sessions, interview sessions, is there anything that we haven't asked that you would like for us to know?
Let's see. One of the things that we haven't gotten into too deeply is process improvement. I think that anytime that you're working in a bureaucratic environment, which there are some areas, of the city that are certainly bureaucratic in nature, you really need to look at process improvement. One of the things that we've done in Longmont is work very closely with the Denver Peak Academy, and they are really the experts in the state on lean processes. And so, as you know, I think it started with a Japanese process of really looking at step-by-step procedures of how you improve that. That's something that I've gone through, and we've done that successfully, particularly with the development review process in San Angelo. We had the development community complained on a regular basis about the time that it took, the mixed messages that were coming from staff. And so we worked to do a current kind of what our current process is, and then we spent days longer with a group of frontline, middle management, senior management staff, really looking at how to improve that process. So I think that that's something that we haven't necessarily talked about, but I think it's something that's critical that you have a leader, and you really have leaders throughout the organization that understand how to do process improvement.
Councilmember Barentine.
I asked mine in my follow-up. I don't have any further questions, thanks.
I'll ask the next one, which is, well, actually, Heidi, where are we on time? Okay, let's do this. Does anybody else have a burning question before we move to his questions of us? Nope. Okay, let's open it up for you. What would you
Great.
like to ask us?
And I hope I did better on time management than I did in my
Yeah, did
last
great.
meeting.
You did great.
One of the questions that I can't remember, maybe it was you, Mayor Pro Tem Russell, was about the interaction of council with staff. And I've actually learned since then that there's actually a charter provision about that. Now, understanding that there is a charter provision, but also understand there's a reality for council members to have interaction, particularly with leadership. And I try to answer that myself, talking about I want to be kept aware of that communication, particularly if it is in the form of any kind of directive or a change in direction. What is your philosophy as a council about interacting and communicating with staff?
Mayor Pro Tem.
I would like to say that I appreciated your response the other day. It
Oh, I think it's not on, sorry, I just noticed. Seen
I
you start again.
apologize. I would like to say I appreciated your answer the other day, that I believe it is a breath of fresh air. I do believe that staff has every right to know when a council member is talking, if we're talking to a staff member, that you have every right to know that we're talking, but I think that there's this balance, and I felt that balance in your response the other day, because I think this council has been stifled in the past because of not being able to speak to staff members or worrying about it.
Right.
And I don't believe that it's our job. There is a provision in the charter. We are not to direct staff. That is your job. So I appreciate your response the other day.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Berentine.
I had an opportunity to serve on council from 2003 to 2007. It was a much different interpretation of that charter. What direction was when we came in? It was direction of the police and fire. It was not to speak to staff. So when you kind of change the interpretation of that, that kind of creates a barrier, a wall. So you've got staff can talk to staff, administration can talk to staff, community can talk to staff, council can't. And that creates a problem when you interpret it that way. I believe your answer to that was some problems that you had in Huntsville, which I took note of, which was that when you have a city manager, a mayor, and council trying to shut down communication, that creates barriers and walls, and it quite honestly makes the administration look like they're afraid. It makes them look like there's not a leadership position, that there is something going on with the people who are directly responsible for speaking and being the voice of the community and the constituency, that is my boss, is shut down that way. That becomes a problem. So when you have any kind of administration thing that looks as if there's a problem with the council communicating, not directing, but communicating, being able to have a working relationship, getting information, that creates a barrier and a wall that looks like there's people are hiding things or not communicating, and that creates angst and concerns that may be realistic to, maybe they are a problem, and maybe they're not, and it's just creating the illusion, which I think is a problem. So I think in my different times on council that it's the way that it's interpreted, and that is directly the leadership or lack thereof from the city manager and how comfortable they feel in their leadership position.
Okay, great.
Councilmember Wink, did you want to add into that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I think relationship building across the city is critically important, and that includes building relationships with staff members as a council member. I've enjoyed developing relationships with our staff, and where 100% of the time where it includes policy, the content of the work, I've certainly initiate that through the city manager. Be it, I think I'd like to have a conversation with this person, I'd like to know more about this. I mean, so I certainly defer to the city manager and ensure he or she knows what I want, why, and even if I make a suggestion, it goes there, and then if directed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Do you have another question?
What is the willingness of council or the openness of council to, the hard work of visioning? How, number one, do you even see it as a need? And number two, is it something that you've tried before and it's failed, or maybe I'm just not aware of a vision that's out there that exists? What's your approach to visioning?
I'll start out. I think we need to always be revisioning and recasting, and maybe not, throwing everything out that we just did, but building on it and making sure it's still current. And of course, we have council that changes every 2 years, so you want to make sure everyone's on the same page. I think that one of the problems we've had in the last couple of years is that there was a visioning that was done internally by staff directors, and then there was one done with us, and we weren't a part of that first process. And I think it really truncated our process then of feeling like we were a part of a vision, and we were simply adopting the Englewood 5. And while they work, we hadn't been a part of that process. So I think I myself would love to see us do something where we're all openly brainstorming, doing whatever we need to do. Councilmember Berentine.
I would echo some of what the mayor has said. I believe that there has been some work done on that, and I do believe that there was a kind of siloing of the effort when Transformation Point came in. A lot of work and effort went in, and a lot of kind of having too much focus on being change and the change agent, and not doing, I think, what you alluded to earlier, which was allowing an opportunity to see whether what you're doing is going to work or not. So there has to be a point when, once you do the visioning, you actually implement some of it, have an assessment period, and make some evaluations to it. So you can't constantly be changing. That's not vision. That's just chaos. And if you don't ever have an opportunity to go, let's see, and sometimes visioning is, like marriage, it's a little bumpy road, but you're going in the right direction, and you just need to tweak things. So you need to have some kind of assessment period, so that you're not just constantly visioning and having things that sound good, but you're kind of implementing them, getting into the dirt, and then see what works and what doesn't, and having that evaluation process. And I think, like what the mayor brought up, is that has to be a flow to that, instead of what may feel like a little bit of just constant chaos, and that's not vision. So I think there's been some really good ideas. She's right. But I think that there hasn't been the opportunity to really put that process into it.
We are out of time, but thank you so much. You've had some great questions, and appreciate your answers and your time with us again today, taking a whole day.
Thank you. It's been great.
And enjoy the rest of the afternoon. We'll see you a
Yes.
little later
Will you
again.
all be at the public forum?
Oh, yes,
Oh, great.
yes.
Very good. You're the guy who always helps public event to be heard around PowerPoint, right?
Known as AKA Sam everything. Sorry, we've had I think we're fine, given the fact that we had this problem with sound, but take a break, and we'll come back in 5 minutes.
I thought about parking down underneath.
still. And I keep forgetting to reset this. So I think I need to.
Like we're in preschool, we got snack time now.
I need a nap to go with it. Got a mat for my nap? I think we're ready. Yeah. Hi there. Welcome, Mr. Andrews. So for the public, this is Scott Andrews, our next interview for the day. Thank you for being here. We're going to go around like we did the other night.
Okay.
We actually have a lot of questions. We have 12 in the first run, and then we have a few just specifically to you,
Okay.
and then some closing questions. So we'll try and keep it paced well to get through all of them within the next 50 minutes. But I'll start out with welcome back, and you've had a chance to meet with some of our employees and our department directors. What are your impressions, and can you tell us more about why you want to be the city manager of Englewood? And also, if you've had your tour, so include that in your observations as well.
Some impressions of the staff and why I want to be here. All right.
Yeah. Impressions of the city, the directors,
Absolutely.
and why you want to be here.
Well, I was blown away by the passion of the staff. Oh, not on?
Oh, sorry, we didn't, yes, it's on, but pull it up closer.
sure.
And then just keep it on. We will,
right.
yeah, leave the green light on. Thanks, Sam.
Test. There we go. Really, really impressed by the dedication and passion of the staff. The team members are deeply dedicated to what they're doing, to the community itself. They take great responsibility in their roles, and it really just resonated on why I want to be here. So the next part of the question was why I want to be here. That stems from everything from the green space to the accessibility, the small city within the big city, transit options, green living, 16 parks, 150 square miles of space. I'm an economic development background guy, so when I toured the city today, the one word that comes to mind, and you'll hear me say this later, is opportunity. There's so much opportunity here. If nothing changes, we could sit back and organically see so much unfold in the next 5 years. What would happen if we were just pro-business, pro-growth? There would be so much opportunity. There's so many things to be so proud of, but yet this is really just the start of what could be. So I was just completely impressed with the tour, with the staff, and definitely resonated on why I want to be here.
Great, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
As you know, the Denver area and Inglewood are experiencing a great deal of growth and development pressure. This can create tension in a community. What types of experiences have you had in your career that can help guide us through the changes our community is undergoing?
Absolutely. I also, my last 2 cities, as I mentioned previously, I've been a small city within a large city environment. In my current city, I indicated this in my previous interview, we plopped down a playoff contending baseball team 3 miles from City Hall and an entire complex with entertainment venues, and suddenly you have to deal with more crime than you used to, more homelessness than you used to. That's not a stranger of a topic. I know what you're dealing with here as well. So balancing that between the infrastructure needs versus the potential of going to a bond for recreation. What are wants? What are needs? I think the answer is slow growth. With a $100 million budget, there's little room for error in a city of 35,000. So hearing the community out, hearing what those needs are, listening to your respective constituents, and as a staff, making sure we're all on a unified vision. I've reviewed the comp plan extensively. Is that the playbook? If it's not, then I need a different playbook because I want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Thank you. Councilmember Cuesta.
I have a 2-part question, and I'd be happy to repeat any of it. Please tell us about your approach to economic development. When do you get involved in a development or redevelopment project? How have you ensured the city is getting the best deal it can get in previous projects you have been involved in or led?
So my approach to economic development, and then how do we know the city is getting the best deal?
Correct.
All right. I've been in cities where economic development means being open for business versus seeking business out. And as I come fresh off my meeting with the business community here, I think we're probably somewhere in between. And I think Inglewood is a vast difference between, you have 35% millennials, but then you have multiple generations living here. So in terms of economic development, you want to make sure you're going with a unified vision of the community. So if that, based off your comp plan, is slow, smart growth by maintaining historical feel, maintaining transit options, maintaining walkability, and everything you've listed previously as a priority, then that would be my guidebook. So my approach is always follow the guidebook and the unified vision for the city, seeking business out rather than being responsive to it, letting the business community know what the goals are, and communicating with those community leaders like the folks upstairs in the previous meeting, so that when you have a highly contentious item like one you previously had, you have folks that have skin in the game, so to speak, one way or the other. They want to be informed, and you want to make sure we're hearing the entire community. So the best deal involved, I know Inglewood hasn't done a great deal in terms of incentives before because it hasn't really had to, and that is a fantastic problem of prosperity. However, when you're trying to lure in certain things like higher end jobs, things need to be looked at for the medical community while it's thriving here. How do you continue to expand that and build off that? There's so many blue collar jobs here, and that's not a bad thing, but however, there's no room for growth. There's no annexation here. Being landlocked means higher paying jobs. So attracting those communities, at times that will mean some incentives. But the city's doing a great job of that. There are EZs, there's OZs, the transit opportunity. There's so many things already in place. I think it's a matter of selling that to the community, making sure everyone is aware and knowing all the success stories of the coffee shop across the street, the distillery down the street. Those are the stories that the community needs to be hearing as well, and not just the controversial ones. We need to get behind that and control that message.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Cuesta. Wink. I'm looking right at both of you.
You can call me Cuesta. It's
Yeah.
okay. Mr. Andrews. Why do you believe you are ready for a city manager opportunity?
I eat, breathe, and sleep city management. This is all I've wanted to do since year one, and I worked in a city that I snuck into as a kid. I had some fantastic mentors along the way. I've always had job titles that didn't indicate what my responsibility was completely, even back to my early recreation days. In my current city, I have a city administrator that treats me as a total peer, while only half those city departments are mine, and I've never directly run police per se. I am involved in every single weekly meeting, every monthly meeting. I'm on all those late night emails that keep us all up at night. I'm involved in every part of the process. I've been totally blessed to have an administrator that treats me like a peer. I'm in every meeting with the mayor and council. In fact, oftentimes I get those calls because I've had that leader. I'm coming from a city of nearly 70,000 with a budget identical to yours. I want to be here. I'm capable and I'm ready, and I'm excited for the opportunity to lead Inglewood.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sierra.
Sure. As an assistant, you've had more of a project-oriented approach to your day-to-day duties and responsibilities. How do you think you will move from project management to more of a strategic and higher-level focus in your day-to-day activities?
I don't want to avoid your question, but it plays off my previous question. I've been completely hands-on. I speak to 5 of my 7 council members daily. I'm completely hands-on, and my administrator and mayor would definitely tell you that. If I don't make that phone call about 10 a.m. every day, I'm going to get it in return. So I am very hands-on currently. However, in my last 2 roles, I have led the strategic planning process. That is what I am totally excited about. I mean, I am the nerdy kid that played SimCity growing up, so to unfold and have it be on this scale, that is exactly what I've been waiting and preparing for my entire career. The strategic planning is the part that I enjoy the most, having the bird's eye view, looking at properties and how do you assemble them, how does this grant study tie in with our comp plan, are we on track for our comp plan, where are we in completion to where we should be. Those are the things that I truly enjoy and I'm actually succeeding. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Could you, I'd like to ask a follow-up.
Yeah.
You've seen our comp plan then, and you said that you were very much involved with the strategic planning of your current city. How would you critique ours, or what do you think are its strengths? What do you think might be some interesting challenges?
I think the biggest challenge is the comp plan the guide? So reason being is looking at, to get controversial, some recent developments that were turned down. I think in the comp plan, some of that spells out that it should be something that's looked at. Again, that's easy for me to say when I'm not sitting there and I have 2 hours of public comment. However, saying that staff needs guidance, and until we have different words, we're going to continue to seek the path of whatever the comp plan is. So we need a playbook. So whatever that unified vision is, I want to make sure I'm echoing that to the staff and being responsive to each of you, your awards, and your constituents. So to me, it's just a sheet of paper and just a book unless we all get behind it completely.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Barentine is next.
Can you give us an example of regional partnerships you've initiated and how you went about developing a regional approach to an issue?
Sure. One I'm very proud of in my current role, and I know this was implemented 10 years ago in Denver, but we're a little slower in the South, was the hands-free ordinance. That's something that started in my current city. I helped write that language in Smyrna. We were the first city to adopt it. It was highly controversial. I know you all probably nod and smile because it was implemented here over 10 years ago. Helping to educate the county as a whole, the neighboring cities, having our police officers communicate with other police officers, me talking to my peers in the other 6 cities in the county. That was how that got some momentum. On the flip side of that, the neighboring city, who all happens to be the county seat, adopted shortly after we did because of that communication. And my mayor pro tem, who was kind of the catalyst for making it happen, is a lobbyist by day, so he got some support at the Capitol, and honestly, it all unfolded in a matter of 6 months, and it's something that has already saved a lot of lives, and it's now, it's Georgia law.
Thank
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Our staff has gone through a lot of change in the last 4 years. How would you approach making a change in process or the city organization if you were our next city manager?
Change in process, are you referring to org chart or just processes, ma'am?
Just the process of how you would go about change, the process itself and the organization.
Sure, my first 100 days, I would hit the ground with as much, you've seen my research abilities, and I'm eager to kind of sit back those first 2 weeks and get your preferences as a council, get the department head's preferences and learn. And then the next 2 weeks, see if that's truly working and make those observations. I would fully expect by days 45 through 60 to be implementing those changes that I learned in the first 3 to 4 weeks. And that includes frequency of communication, where some of you prefer, speak daily. Others of you want that email recap. So I want to learn that. I want to see what the department's doing. I want to be able to then not make a swift change, because that doesn't want over support. I think you earn the morale, the trust of the team goes with some observation and learning. And I want to spend the first probably 30 to 45 days watching and listening before taking action. But I want to see what's working and then make changes as needed, Mayor.
How do you go about earning morale and trust of a team? What's your process of doing
Sure,
that?
I think the first thing I took away from coffee this morning, and then they turned the tables on me when they interviewed me, was just listening. I think a lot of them just want to be heard. I'm not saying they're neglected or anything along those lines, but just truly being heard out. Some of the frontline staff in particular probably don't get that face time that some of the department heads get. So just hearing them out, learning what makes them tick. For some people, it's a project being implemented that they work. To other people, it's strictly money or days off or whatever. But knowing what makes each person tick, that starts with just a relationship, and that starts with trust.
Thank you.
Yes,
Mayor
ma'am.
Pro Tem Russell?
Can you tell us about a time when you initiated a significant change in your organization? What was it? How do you identify the need for change and then implement it?
A significant change in organization. Was the second part, Mayor?
What was it? How do you identify the need for change and then implement it?
Sure. My current city, we've had to make several folks that were previously managers department heads. And that is something that is, some of the folks that have been there 20 years didn't necessarily like. Where are you sitting? Why are they sitting at the same table I am? They're a manager, not a director. That was just a slow buy-in process, and the same thing they had to go through is the trust and respect of everyone else. But two things that jump out at me were making my current museum manager sitting at the table and acting as a department head, and then in the past 6 months, making engineering its own standalone department. And that's been one of my departments. In addition, right now, economic development has shifted from a manager under community development. Just recently had my community development director leave, and that's 3 department heads in 1 year. I know succession planning is a priority here. Believe me, I've been on the wrong side of that equation, and I will prepare for that. But elevating those managers in areas that needed this additional assistance and visibility of the administration department, and having them report directly to administration, to me, has been a great deal of help. It's helped them get a lot of accomplished, and it's cut back on a little bit of bureaucracy, and so to speak, too. So again, to answer your question, elevating some departments directly reporting to the city administrator, it's been a huge help. It's allowed us to cut back on some time and really find out that maybe our community development director wasn't doing everything he needed for the economic development department in the past. And the same thing when engineering reported to public works. I think we have some very capable people, and we've learned through the process that those folks are the right people and they're in the right place.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Cuesta?
You bet. This next question has 3 parts. Can you tell us about a time when your elected body was divided on an issue? What was your role, and how did you and your manager approach it? And how would you do, or what would you do anything different if given the opportunity?
All right, elected body being divided, how did I approach it and the outcome? What was the last part, sir?
If you cared to do anything differently, please describe it.
Sure. Just recently, in fact, this is something I was interested with here as well. Scooters are becoming a hot topic in my current community, and in fact, I'm surprised to not see them everywhere here. I saw no plan in place. I know Denver has one, has flip-flopped and learned quite a bit along the way. I'm in the same situation in my current city, having Atlanta right down the street, and the scooters pile up all over. People either love them or hate them. So we were adopting an anti-scooter policy that the mayor got behind immediately. I saw the email coming through to him. I was copied on, I believe, at 12. It bothered him enough that by 2 a.m. he's emailing me. So that next meeting, we had to quickly form a policy that, and it wasn't entirely reflective of the community nor of the council. So the chair of our community development on council wanted to wait and see what our transit study said, because similar to what you guys say in your comp plan, multimodal is very, very important. Let's get cars off the street. So scooters tied in very well to that in the grand scheme of things. So suddenly we had 3 council members in complete support of scooters, and then the mayor, who's been there 40 years, as I told you in the past, being anti-scooter completely. So ultimately we said, let's do some more research, let staff dig into this, let's see what the neighboring cities are doing. And we ended up tabling it. And at the same time, the mayor pro tem I mentioned earlier, who's a lobbyist, had someone come to him, I don't know if it's timing, but wants to do a study with us and a pilot program for some scooters. So we've started a committee, and several staff members are now looking at the pros and cons, and ultimately just trying to come to some consensus, make sure we educate council, and ultimately clearly communicate what the pros and cons are, and what the reservations are versus what are the pros. So in this particular situation, I don't know that I'd really approach anything, because this is more of an ongoing situation. It's very fluid, but I'm just continuing to dig into best cases scenarios as well as ones that have failed, because that's the first question every council asks is, who's doing this, how's it worked, or where's this failed epically? So I never want to be on one of those scenarios. So
Thank you.
Question, sir?
Thank you, Mayor. It does. Yes, sir.
Councilmember Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. When preparing reports for your council members, do you provide a recommendation? Do you make recommendations? And do you provide alternative policy options? Can you describe your process, please?
Yes. One of the things I'm very proud of in my current city was implementing an open container and restaurant district. And that started about 1.5 years ago with just invigorating our market villages, similar to your downtown here, where there's some restaurants and walkability options. So we started small. We had no police issues, no rise in crime, but there was a rise in business. So we continued to build that. Then we went to a couple nearby restaurants, and then we connected one restaurant district to another. So 3 restaurant changes later, this thing has spidered out quite a bit. The community has not had any opposition. Even the local religious community or anyone has not had any pushback. Where we did get pushback later on was a couple parks that tied in next to this, and folks would get married, and we never had out of control open drunkenness or anything along those lines. But when I went to make the recommendation to continue the open container and restaurant district, we had 2 council members that had pushback that honestly I didn't expect on this, because I thought it was clearly communicated in the 2 previous meetings. So as I leave a work session, I try to say, hey, next up, you're going to hear about this. And I try to always plant seeds, so I don't want you guys ever caught off guard. But when I made that recommendation, there wasn't a tie-in for this arboretum gazebo area that I did not expect. So quickly thought on my feet, how can we get this passed? We amended language that prohibited use in that area, but still continued the other areas. So it was pretty much win-win in that scenario.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Councilmember Sierra.
Sure. Could you tell us about a difficult issue you personally had with elected officials and your role in resolving it?
Sure. I have dynamic personalities in my current council. I've been very fortunate to agree to disagree and educate where I can and communicate clearly, and haven't really had any difficult issues, so I'm not deflecting. I'll go back to my previous city where I did learn the hard way, where I told again, 6 years ago, I told an elected official that was the head of the arts organization that he wasn't an artist. And that did not go well, as you might imagine. So that was a learning lesson. We had good enough rapport and had a relationship built up enough where, a lunch and a good talk got through it. But never again did I make that leap in faith of something along those lines. So that's probably the best situation. I think I've just learned to educate, not take things personal, to communicate as clearly as possible. And I haven't really had too many difficult issues or conflicts with my current council or even the previous one.
Thank you. Councilmember Barentine.
We have elections in November. How do you disseminate information in an election environment?
Thank you. I think it's one of the challenges in Inglewood, and the more I see and the more I learn is just communicating everything across the board, whether that's getting folks out to a controversial subject. The census is coming up. That's another huge one. With elections on the horizon, I think we need to reach people in a preferred platform. There's a tremendous young population here, particularly of all those graduating high school. Are we reaching folks through youth councils? Are we reaching them through Instagram? Facebook has only 3,000 followers in a city of 35,000. I don't think we're reaching them there either. Our rec guides are primarily a guide. It's beautiful, and there's fantastic messages there. But are we going to reach people through snail mail? Are we going to do it through social media? Are we going to use utility bills? Are we going to do all the above? But right now, I don't think we're getting behind the message effectively. I think it has to be across the board. Maybe it's another $20,000 investment in communications. I don't know exactly what that translates to monetarily, but I think communicating is the challenge right now. So I think every method, ma'am, is the answer to your question, whether that's social media, maybe that's leveraging each of you to tell your constituents and those either at large, helping to be megaphones too. And I take personal responsibility and the staff side of that. And I've heard fantastic things about the new communications manager here, but I think that's just the start, reaching people in their preferred method, whether that's outreach, whether that's your weekly coffee visits you have, social media, everything. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Excuse me. So it's obvious your regional experience has not been in this part of the country. You've never worked in Colorado. So how would you get up to speed on state laws and other differences between Colorado and Georgia and Florida, where you've worked in the past?
Absolutely.
Maybe we can close the door. All right, go ahead.
I'll lead by saying I lead with my networks. So I made a transition very easily from Florida to Georgia. I showed up at a Georgia City County Management Association, and 5 people I wanted to meet and get to know. I was able to build a network from there. Wherever I go, I build a network. Currently, I set up a group where all the aspiring and assistants and managers meet every other month, and that's something that allowed me to hit the ground running in my previous role when I got this 2 years ago. It's one thing to be department head, it was another to be in city management, so that allowed me to move that same transition. I've already reached out to the Colorado City County Management Association, and as you saw from my first interview, I knew a lot of the folks in the business meeting or prior to meeting them today. I want to be able to hit the ground running on day one, so building those relationships, having those organized meetings. So a lot of the things we're facing here, Littleton, Sheridan, Boulder, Golden, everyone is facing. The answers are out there. We don't have all the answers, but I will work tirelessly until I have solutions for everything we're facing here.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
It looks like you have oversight of several departments and an active role in the budget and capital improvement planning process. What interaction do you have with public safety operations?
Mm-hmm. So as I indicated earlier, I've had no direct. I have never led a police department. I've done several ride-alongs. I am in every single weekly meeting. So I could tell you I lead it just with my administrator. That's what she would tell you. She treats me as a total peer. I'm on all those weekly calls. I know the challenges they're making. I'm budgeting in SPLOST for a $20 million joint use public facility currently. so I know their needs. I work out at the police station every day purposely, so I get to know the staff, and while it's not my department, I have that rapport with them. They often come to me rather than the mayor, rather than the city administrator, because I have those relationships. So I jump in head first. I learn on the ground roots. I do ride-alongs with them. I see what they're facing. I'm copied on each email as we have stings. As you know, we just hosted the Super Bowl in Atlanta recently. The All-Star game was just announced for MLB 3 miles from my city hall. So those preparations are already underway with the police department. That's something while I've directly never overseen, I've always been completely in the loop. Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Cuesta.
You bet. I'm going to dive into the closing questions, which the first one being, what do you believe you would need from this council to help you be successful in your city manager role in Inglewood?
That's the hardest and easiest question. Your support and a unified vision. It's quite often when you come to a new organization where staff blames council, council blames staff. My job is to be an advocate for everyone, to see through that. I want your support. I want the ability to have that limited window to observe. Maybe there's a department head in the past that wasn't an overachiever. I want the ability to see if I can turn them around, and if not, we will make changes as needed. But I want your support, and ultimately, I want to make sure I'm following the vision that this leadership team set forward. So whether that's the comp plan or whether that's something else, I want to make sure I am echoing that, and that is the one thing I continue to hear from the team today, is some of them just want a little guidance, and I think I can help with that. It's probably been a challenge to have someone fill in for some time now, and I know I'm capable. I know I can help facilitate discussion. I'm a completely approachable person, and I'll communicate with everyone as effectively, and that includes each of you. But I want to make sure I'm following to the same marching orders that you've laid out.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there anything else you would like us to know that we've not yet discussed?
How much time do we have?
I think we're
1 minute.
fine.
No, I've done my homework quite a bit. I really want to be here. This is everything that I thought I knew was validated today when meeting the team, when exploring the city a little more, when exploring it with those tour guides that help put those buildings and infrastructure in place, learning about the parks from the Parks and Rec director, seeing the passion of, the Mikes of the world that have been here 46 years, getting that firsthand experience from them has really validated everything why I want to call this home, why I want to raise a family here. This is truly a small city within a big city. This is what I've prided myself in my whole career. I thrive in that environment. I'm a consensus building coach / cheerleader, and I want to make sure I am marching to the playbook that this team lays out. And once I have that, I will absolutely make this the best possible city it can be, and I'm really excited to be here.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Sierra.
During that first interview, we did discuss the residency requirements and the move into Inglewood, and I believe the answer that you provided back was you wanted to give adequate notice to your employer. Mm-hmm. Do you have a timeline on what that means?
No, I think my mayor's comfortable with 3 to 4 weeks, but as I kind of jokingly said, that moving truck's outside. My poor fiance has already applied for a nursing license, so no pressure to me. I really want to be here. I will get here as soon as possible. Just tell me where to sign.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Barentine.
Aside from if there are any more questions that you have for us, I don't have anything else.
What would your expectations be for me for my first 30 days? That is my only question.
Does anybody want to start with that one? You're asking, what would your
Yes.
direction from us be in the first 30 days?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'll start out with, of course, I'd want you to get to know our directors really well and find out what they're doing and get up to speed with the kinds of things, projects, both the struggles and the joys that they've had in the last year and where they're headed, what their goals are. Councilmember Wink?
So much to manage. I would agree with the mayor. In 30 days, I think you would be focused on relationship building with key staff and other staff, primarily the key staff, of course. That relationship building is going to serve anything else you endeavor throughout the city, and so that's always a chief first step in a new role of this size or breadth, I would say. And at the same time, I think you'll probably be busy acclimating to Colorado, learning those laws, learning the differences between, the budget and what's specific to Colorado municipality, of Englewood, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot. It will be fast moving, but I think by the end of 30 days, that's what I would anticipate being done. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Anyone else?
Others? Councilmember Cuesta.
My 30-day vision would be pretty limited in that I don't think there's a lot that you can get done in an organization this size, other than I think really getting to know names, meet the leadership team, and I would think really feel them out. I think the more questions you can ask, the better. I'm hoping that you can, or whoever this person is that plays a role, can serve as a better conduit between council and staff. And not because we're all going to have the same perspectives on things, but just so we can understand the different perspectives and really the best solutions we can find. So I think your first 30 days really just getting your sea legs, making as many introductions, going to lunch, sitting in on meetings with leadership teams, just see where the team is going, and then hopefully bringing that back to us. As much as council guides the manager guides staff, I am really looking to hear what does staff have to say as well. And everybody's mentioned the turnover we've had. I'm really hoping that we can put an end to some of that. And a lot of it, I think, is communication, just understanding where folks are and really getting the pulse of it. And so whoever that manager is, I'm hoping they can do a good job of just serving again as that intermediate area between the two parties. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Councilmember Barentine.
I think the first thing you do is find out where all the bathrooms are. Make sure that you know where the breakfast queen is, what's going on in the community. What any home is, what any organization is, what any community is way different from the outside and the social perspective that they put out there than the nitty-gritty when they sit around and eat dinner. And that's a huge difference in trying to figure that out. So I would agree with my fellow council members that, it takes time to build relationships. Nobody comes in and immediately has trust or authority or a perspective, and that's a balancing act. So it's kind of doing what Councilmember Cuesta said, and that's really figuring out who all's who and how it all fits together, along with the history of it and the vision of where we're trying to go, because there's a bunch of different visions too, and how they all meld together. So I don't think 30 days is really.
Right.
I've done accounting for a lot of companies, a lot of large organizations, and there's generally an attitude that it's really the ownership of them by that first year, and that it's a process through that piece of it. So I think 30 days is a pretty short period. Mm-hmm. I think it'll take you a lot shorter to find out where the bathrooms are, but in just understanding, it's really very fundamental, like what he said, what Councilmember Cuesta said, and then kind of building on from there.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cuesta? Thank you. Well, I'm not always watching and seeing them, so good. Any other questions, further questions? Was that your?
No, I asked quite a few
one?
in the first round a couple days ago, as you know, and I had staff answer a lot of those today too, so I feel great about that, and I'm very excited about this opportunity. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thank you for flying back, being with us, and spending a whole day getting to know the city and our folks here. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And we'll
Thank you,
see you a
everyone.
little bit later today.
Sounds good.
That was quite a flash. Didn't hear any. So we are really free. Yep.